Good morning, Chair MacArthur and Commissioners. Chair MacArthur.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Welcome, everybody. Hello. I'm Robin MacArthur, Chair of the Land Conservation and Development Commission. Today is Friday, April 1st, so it's April Fool's Day, which is very exciting. And so, Esther, you mentioned that Jim is Zooming in, well, by phone, not by video. Is that correct?
Yes, we are trying to make that connection right now.
Well, I will let you do that and let me know when he's on. And so just for the public, this morning we have director's report, commission business, and then we will go into executive session to interview the top 2 candidates for the next director of the department. We'll come back after lunch and in a public setting, deliberate on that decision most likely. And then we will go on and have the legislative update and as a final, the housing, important housing overview. And today, Professor Sandoval, Commissioner Sandoval has an excused absence, although he will reconnect for the executive session.
And Chair, I also have a excused absence from 2 to 3.
Thank you. That's right. I appreciate you reminding me of that.
Thank you.
Quick question as we're waiting for Jim to get on the line. Quick question for Steve. So yesterday officially gavelled in the first hearing of CFAC. I closed the public hearing part for yesterday, but left that open-ended. Is that the way to do that until we actually take action in May? Or is there some other official thing I should have done to sort of christen that? What is your advice on that?
No particular magic. I think we have done what we're required to do under the Administrative Procedures Act by providing the notice in the Secretary of State's bulletin that designates when the last day for public comment is. So it doesn't super matter what we did yesterday in terms of gaveling in. And if anybody has any confusion about that, we can make that clear to people that we're accepting comment up until the deadline in the next commission meeting. So.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. And I saw on my email that staff is already in preparation for the final RAC meeting. So thanks to staff for doing that. If Jim is unable to connect, Esther, we could, I don't know if anyone is teed up to do commission business first.
Chair MacArthur, this is Kirsten. Morning. I'm not sure that they are quite yet. Maybe I could ask Kasseri and Ingrid to reach out to Rochelle and also Sadie. I could give an update on LOAC, but instead I wonder if, not to usurp, but I could touch on the policy option packages that are in the director's report and get that out of the way.
That'd be really great, Deputy Director. Thank you.
Sure. It's page 1 of the director's report. And there was a supplemental that Emma had put in, which is a detailed overview. So this is tab 5. Shall I go ahead, Chair MacArthur?
Please do, yes.
Okay, thanks. So good morning again, Chair MacArthur, Vice Chair Holoba, and Commissioners. I'm Deputy Director Kirsten Green, and just sort of treading water here until our director can be on. We are having some technical issues in Salem with our VPN. So I know that Jim was prepared to give you your report this morning and should be on soon. Commissioner Jacobson has their hand up.
Commissioner Jacobson.
Yeah, I'm actually having some technical issues on my end too, and everyone's cutting out. So I'm going to turn off my camera for a minute and see if that helps my bandwidth and see if I can figure out what's going on, but I'm still here. I just wanted to let you know. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. And I see Sadie's on as well this morning already. Good morning, Sadie. So in case we need to flip over to commission business as well. Thank you. So on we're so excited about the budget build process, and you'll hear a bit more about that from Michelle later. One of the things that's important to us on top of the continuing service level is our policy option packages. And we're about to go out for public review on those. So again, this is tab 5 in your packet and item B. And I just wanted to touch on, for Commission's familiarity, these major sort of buckets, and also just note that Emma Land is prepared to have more conversation on this if you would like during the legislative report this afternoon. But they are long-awaited. The first one is our long-awaited and long hoped for goal revision for Goal 1. And it's a little bit, because it's a little bit broader than that, we're not just calling it a Goal 1 update. It really includes a number of programming, a few items around equitable community engagement, including additional internal resources to support our agency staff, as well as export best practices for diversity, equity, and inclusion to local government partners. So it's a bit more than just that goal rewrite. That would include, since diversity, equity, inclusion includes and necessarily the inclusion part touches the tribal liaison program, there might be some additional resources that a new staff person could help with on the tribal liaison aspect. You noted, the commissioners heard yesterday from Commission Affairs Coordinator Andy Lanier that there is, the program is growing. Where either we're doing better at offering consultation, or that the tribal nations are more able to, in wanting to engage with our work. Both are very positive. So we want to make sure to continue to support that going forward on the government to government relations basis. The second one, just quickly, is the wildfire adapted communities placeholder, and that would be for implementing the recommendations of the Senate Bill 762 wildfire adapted communities suite of work, which commissioners know is underway. The third is to implement the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking. So we know that is quite in flux. The fourth is the regional housing needs analysis, sort of placeholder again for that work forthcoming. The fifth is rural transportation equity, and that is a continuation of a program that we were gifted by the Governor's Office and the Racial Justice Council. This is getting underway. Maddie Phillips joins us next week to truly kick that off. And then finally is a position, two more. Just a federal funding position authority for habitat infrastructure for the coastal program. This is nice under one of the federal bills lately. I won't try and guess which one. But programmatically, nationally, coastal states are getting more resources for infrastructure support associated with the coastal program. So we'll be receiving funding for a new staff person for 5 years. So this would be a position authority for that. And that's very exciting news. Patty will be leading that. And then we do have an industrial lands POP that we added since the publishing of your report, and that's covered in the supplemental attachment A, but that would be for staff support to help coordinate with Business Oregon on a new program that would be similar to the Transportation and Growth Management Program on the transportation side, but it'd be supporting communities to really have more robust inventories and programming around industrial lands. So it's quite an ambitious list of policy option packages, Chair MacArthur. This is probably the biggest, longest list you've ever seen. So we're sort of, with sort of being ambitious here, and we'll see how it goes. But we will be beginning the public outreach on this next week. We'll have our first public forum, and I'm happy to answer questions. I do see Commissioner Boyer's hand is up, Chair MacArthur.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Director Green. Commissioner Boyer.
Morning, everybody. Thank you, Kirsten. So I'm curious on the industrial lands request. So would this include an inventory?
That is a very good question. Thank you. Let me answer that carefully. Because we are really in joint programming on this with Business Oregon, and they're leading that body of work, and in the near term, they are starting some inventory work, but I'd like to bring that back to a future commission meeting if I could. Thank you. And so I'll try work to include that in the director's report in 2 months, if not before. Thank you.
Commissioner Mack.
Thank you. Great review, and I appreciate seeing the list. I guess my question is, given our discussion yesterday on climate-friendly and equitable communities implementation and the potential costs, might there be rethinking of increasing the $3.9 million request to 5 times that amount?
Thank you, Commissioner Lilac. Chair MacArthur, Commissioner Lilac, thank you for that observation and question. We are in line with your thinking on that. And that's part of the outreach that we're just beginning, the survey of local governments, is to try and really to ground truth that to your region, where Angie Brewer is setting up appointments with Damien and Brian and the team at City of Bend, for example, to better estimate what would be needed this biennium. We know that in Bend alone could consume more than that budget amount if we're looking at the entirety of the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking obligation. But we also know that not all of that will happen within one biennium. So we're trying to put a finer point on the universe and then the subset, which would be next biennium for Bend and other communities. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you, which is the reason I said 5 times and not 10 times.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it obviously is a good time to partner with those jurisdictions early on in development of the POP, then build in that constituency to then support that in the legislative process. And I'm sure you're doing that, but we have a very thirsty audience and one that is willing, wants to do the work, but needs the resources to do it. So I think it's an optimal situation to connect and partner early on. Commissioner Warren?
Yeah, I'm super excited about this rural transportation equity POP. I'd love to learn more about that at some point. So if there's any like a quick little one-pager you can send to me or something, I'd really appreciate that.
Yes, Chair MacArthur, Commissioner Warren, thank you. I will ask Esther to help send the full commission the one-pager that we have. And it's about to explode because we've had this one pager around for now since budget build, honestly, since the last session. And we're excited programmatically under the hood to get that out of the way with a request for interest for the communities will be going out, I would say within the month of April. And then also pairing that with a scope of work for consultant selection to do some pairing on it's largely outreach best practices to further engage diverse and low-income communities as jurisdictions are putting forth complicated packages to compete statewide for ODOT funds. So thank you. Look forward to sharing more with that.
And I really like the content of all of these. I would encourage you to think about the way they're presented. This is a marketing tool from the standpoint that it tells the outside world that we are interested in these topics. I would actually go through and take out all the things that refer to planning, even though many of us are planners. We love the idea of planning. To fund planning falls flat, I think, on legislators, and that's the audience as well as the governor's office. And really, it's not a stretch to say this money is for implementation. Right. The example is POP 203. We're not funding planning, and I would start off with saying the POP would provide resources and dollars and technical assistance to local governments to implement. I mean, I just start, here's the audience, this is what we get.
Thank you.
I just think going through these and making them more sexy, more attractive, because something that people would want to fund, as opposed to, oh, we're going to have more money for planning. We all know that it's more than that, but it's so critical to communicate this to the outside world.
It's also true. What you said is even better. It's, what you're saying is true.
Yeah, it's not just a marketing piece. This is true. I mean, those local jurisdictions, we heard loud and clear, they need money.
That's right.
They need technical assistance, and it's our job to help get it for them.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if we have Jim on yet. I know we have Emma who wrote up this material. Emma, did I forget anything? May I ask Chair MacArthur if I've forgotten anything? Thank you, Emma.
Hi, yes. Good morning, everyone. No, Kirsten, I think that you were able to run through those pretty briefly and accurately. I'm happy to touch base on the POPs as well during the presentation later this afternoon when we talk about the legislative session. And of course, please call me with questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm excited about these. I'll say the transition, the change in focus from when I started, maybe 8 years ago in this and looking over these. I see a real shift in the department's focus to implementation and to really forging that strong partnership with local governments.
Actually,
And
Jim,
it's really
since we know that you can dial in.
Hang on.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, Esther, we are hearing you talk to Jim. Jim, good morning. Sorry, Chair MacArthur, to interrupt, but I think we can hear Jim. Yeah.
That's great. So I can turn it over to him.
Are you sure?
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Jim.
Okay. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur. Thank you for the time this morning. I'll bow out.
So good morning, Jim. Sorry that you have to connect in this way, but we'd like to see you.
Apparently my access was cut off a month early. I'm kidding.
Happy Fool's Day.
I'm sorry?
I said it's not true, but but I'm so gullible that I'm worried you're pulling April Fools on us. But sorry, I said I was going to bow out. Now I'll go back on mute.
Trust me, I'm not trying to do an April Fool's thing here at all. And I apologize. So Kirsten obviously did a great job on, I should just let her finish my report. Did you do reopening?
No, sir, we just touched on the POPs, so please go ahead.
All right, very quickly with reopening. You all know that May 1st, we're open to the public. And as Robin said yesterday, we're hoping to at least have a hybrid meeting with some people here in the building and others still on Zoom for May 19 and 20. Staff will start coming back in. Taylor and Carol in particular are working, Carol's been working on it for a long time. Taylor will be coming back into the office on Monday. They're going to start compiling numbers of cubicles and people's preferences. The shorthand on all of this is that people have opted, most people I think have opted for 1 day a week in the office and 4 at home. Others, as you can imagine, really want to get back into the office, and there are some who'd like to stay at home permanently, but we've settled on that middle ground, and we're particularly focusing on getting work teams in here on the same day. I think there's credible research that suggests that remote work can be more productive, but it is also likely less innovative and creative. And so, I'm sorry, I just got a note that said they cannot connect me to the internet and restart, which is what I just did. So I think we're going to be working on this for a while. So we're trying to bring teams together so that they can do the face-to-face work and continue that creativity as well as productivity. And I don't think we need to spend a lot more on that because I'm looking at the clock, which appears to still be working. And I will quickly go to some staff changes. So as you know, and is happening everywhere, we're bringing in a lot of new people, but we also have the other side of the coin, and that is people leaving. So let me start quickly with new people. So Karen Grosluck-McCord started on March 1, so she's been with us now for a complete month, a full month, and she is an urban planner in the Community Services Division, and she's comes to us from Tillamook and Montana and other places around the country, most recently in Tillamook. And she'll be taking the job that Robert and Samuel at one point held as urban planner. And I think you remember the work that they did. Mari Valencia Aguilar is joining us as Mill Housing Planner. Sean Edging, who you all know, got a promotion, and Mari is taking over much of the work that Sean was doing. She's already actively involved in contributing. I think she's been here now for 2 weeks, and she's just great. Kirsten knows her well because Kirsten hired her at Kogan Owens and Green, and also at Enviro Issues. Cindy Smith as Natural Hazards Planner. We've lost a couple of our natural hazards planners in the last while. And Cindy starts in 10 days, so a week from Monday on the 11th. And she comes, sorry, Nick, from Deschutes County Planning Department. I think we've stolen another one. And so we're looking forward to her arrival. A significant promotion, Lisa Phipps, who has been the North Coast Regional Rep for the Coastal Division, will be joining us as Coastal Policy Specialist. Heather Wade was the incumbent. Heather and her family went back to Texas, and we're just thrilled that Lisa will be taking over in that role. She has an extraordinary resume, everything from elected office to years working in not-for-profits on the coast. She just brings an incredible amount of capacity and experience and knowledge to this position, and we're really pleased. So the other side of the coin, Palmer and Patty have both announced their retirements. Palmer will be leaving us in a couple of weeks. I just can't say enough about the work that he's done for us in the last 4 years or so. He and Carrie and Gordon basically did all of the work on all of the staff work on this side for 2001 and 2003, and Palmer shepherded it through the process in the legislature back in the 19th session. He comes to us, or he came to us from DEQ, and has so much wisdom and so much calm advice for us. I'm going to miss Palmer a lot, although I'll only be here for another couple of weeks after he's gone. So maybe I'll get used to it. Patty Snow. Patty Snow started with this department out of graduate school, frankly, before some of you were born. And I don't mean to take light of how long Patty's been working, but she came to the department in '81. She was here for a number of years, spent over 20 years at ODFW, came back to us now almost 10 years ago. Again, just an enormous amount of experience and knowledge and wonderful guidance for the Coastal Division for the last 10 years. Patty will be retiring in August. And to say that the department will miss her is just a huge understatement. So that's all I want to say about that. I see that I have 5 minutes left. This is my last meeting, as you know. And I want to particularly thank you, commissioners. I was thinking at the end of the day yesterday, as I watched you and listened to you deliberate on the path forward for CFAC. And I just smiled. I just was sitting here kind of grinning because you work so well together and you complement each other so well. And for those of you who've been around for a little while, the work that you have done in the last 4 years is really staggering. House Bill 2001, 2003, work on wildfire, work on climate, now tackling CFEC, and as well as passing yesterday revisions to the Territorial Sea Plan. I would argue, Kirsten regularly reminds me, I've been here for 25% of the agency's history. So I haven't been here for the whole thing, certainly, but I would argue that these last 4 years have been as productive, probably more productive than any time in the agency's history. And you've fundamentally made life better for Oregonians by the work that you have done. You ought to be really proud. You ought to be really pleased, and I know you are, really pleased with what's happening, what you've accomplished, and what you've done for Oregonians. I don't even know how to thank you, Robin. Robin and I probably talk 2 or 3 times a week. And you are my counselor, you're my friend, you're my mentor. I just can't thank you enough for what you mean to me and what you have done for me and for this department. Your intellect, your humor, your leadership in guiding us through these enormous workloads, which obviously affect people, mostly positively, but occasionally negatively. And getting us on track when we go slightly off track, and just encouraging us along the way, your positive words of support and encouragement at every milepost along the way. I don't know how to thank you, except to buy you one of those horrible gin martinis, which of course I'm going to do. And in my last 3 minutes, I just want to thank the governor. She's not here. But as I told some staff in a meeting earlier this week, in public service, people often go their entire careers without being able to point to things that they were able to do that were really monumental. And the governor has given us leadership and support and resources and guidance along the way to do all of this work that we've talked about. And personally, it has been the most satisfying work years of my career. To work for Governor Brand, to be able to do what we've done on climate and housing first in the nation for a statewide ban on exclusive single-family zones, a policy rooted in racism, and as Vice Chair Holova pointed out yesterday, we talk about historic harms and inequities, and they're not just historic, but this begins to correct at least one of those major ones, and the things that follow, I think, are going to be extraordinary. So my thanks, and I will do this later to the governor, but I just, this is a woman who has led us for the last 5 years in really extraordinary times. She has historically low approval numbers, and I just think that's so wrong, and I'm so grateful to her for her leadership. So with that, I'm going to stop because my clock says 15 seconds left. And so that's it. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Director Rue. Very touching remarks. I really appreciate everything you said about the work of the department, the commission, and especially me. I feel the same way about you in terms of our partnership. I'm sorry that you can't be on the line today. don't know what's happening there, but the line, I did share balloons. So I thought we'd go, you can't see it, but we thought I thought we would celebrate with some balloons as well as a toast. Just note this is empty for the viewing public, but a little martini glass is what I showed on the screen along with some balloons. I'm sorry you can't see them. And, I just want to say publicly how much I've appreciated you, but I believe that you have promised me, and now it's part of the public record, that you are willing to come back at the May meeting so that we can have a more robust engagement with you to celebrate all your many accomplishments. But just for today, I just want to remark that you're the longest serving director of DLCD. You've survived the sage grouse rulemaking as well as a lot of other complicated rulemaking. You had a steady hand at the wheel during budget cuts, which came, and then COVID came on the heels of that, and in the middle of that, and you had a very steady hand on the department. I know firsthand that you called each and every staff person in the agency at the early part of the pandemic to see how people were doing, all your employees working virtually, which was an amazing thing to do. And you've survived 3 LCDC chairs, as well as my numerous phone calls, many of which were probably bordering on annoying. But anyway, I just wanted to make sure that you know that we really appreciate you. I'd ask my colleagues to join me in celebrating Jim now, but with the idea that we want to celebrate him more officially in May. So open it up to my colleagues.
I'm looking forward to the next meeting where we can digest thoughts, and it's making me sad right now, and I guess I'll come to terms next week. But thank you, Jim, for your leadership. I just, when I think about you, I was thinking about the first time that we met. I think it was with Kristen in a coffee shop, and just talking about your excitement for the future, and basically the future of what we've done in the last 4 years, sort of predicting that we were going to have a very bright future and that I should join in doing this. And so it was very exciting to me to hear that it happened. The thing that you were predicting happened, and I don't think it just happened by accident. It happened because of your leadership and really pushing, especially in the last 2 years. I think it's the positive parts, I guess, of this time period is that it's given us a lot of boldness and freedom to pursue different things and different methods. And I think you demonstrated that beautifully in the last 2 years. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I think others may want to just go ahead and wait and celebrate. Oh, Commissioner Jacobson.
Well, I was just going to say that I still have not gotten to meet you in person, Director Rue. So while retirement is coming up, and I think you disclosed a few meetings ago that you have plans for Costa Rica. And I know Newport is by no means Costa Rica, but I hope at some point you're able to come out to the coast and we can go catch a salmon or have lunch or at least meet in person. So please know that offer is open to you, and I hope we can connect in person sometime.
I'll just say I'll look forward to providing some remarks in May, and what a meeting that will be with also our chair's last meeting. That it's just really it's a significant meeting, and I'll look forward to providing comments then. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think that's my sense is others would like time between now and May to figure out what they want to say as well, and we'll have time to celebrate. Patty, I didn't know until just today that you're leaving. Wow, that's a really big thing too. So lots of transitions, and I think we should just have some kind of big bash in May to celebrate everybody who's leaving and coming, because there's some people online who were introduced that are new recruits. And one of the things that both Deputy Director Green and Director Rue have done is they've really ushered in a new group of people that are just really very talented, exciting, collaborative, talented. I can't say enough about the new recruits that have really brought a lot of new energy, I think, to the department, a new focus, and it's just a wonderful thing to watch. It's been wonderful to watch the transition over the past several years. I think the staff that's emerging now is the staff for this time. And it's a nice combination of people who've been here for a while who have incredible knowledge and new people coming in to absorb that knowledge and then be creative and collaborative about the land use program. So thanks to all you that are on the line today, the new recruits, and we have to appropriately figure out how to celebrate Patty and Palmer and others at our May meeting, which will be in person. With that, I will close this agenda item and then move on to commission business, which is agenda item number 6. And we have 3 items we want to cover: budget, CIAC, Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee, and then directors recruitment. So we're going to take a kind of a straw vote. Well, actually not a straw vote. We're just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the transition at the commission level, and Anjali and I will lead that. And then for public consumption, we'll talk about the director recruitment piece. So starting with Rochelle Corbo on budget. Welcome.
Hi, thanks, Chair MacArthur and the rest of the commission. I don't get to see you very often, so I'm filling in with Carol Bovet for Carol today. She did go over this in the subcommittee, the report. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rochelle Corbo. I'm the budget officer, which is just a fancy way of saying I'm the only budget person on the staff. I was also, I don't know if this will help Jim, but I was also having a lot of internet problems. So excuse I was able to at least get it functioning enough so I could see you. I think Carol went over, at the close of this short session, we did get our SALPOT, which you'll see down here as another $517,000 in general funds appropriated for our agency, and this increase in limitation, which will more than cover the projections we had. The budget projections were based on what actually people would be paid. So it included the COLAs and the steps. And now we have the funding to support that. They also, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair MacArthur and Rochelle, are you intending to share slides, Rochelle? Because they're not on.
I don't know. Would you like me to? I haven't.
You don't have to. Rochelle, pardon me.
That's right. Yeah, I'm referring to a visual that's not there.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Sorry. You can see that I'm not used to this.
If you're just using the attachment, it's under tab. I think it's under tab 6.
No, I think I actually have it pulled up. Let me see if I can share my screen.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that there now?
It is. Thanks, Rochelle.
All right. Sorry about that. Thanks, Kirsten. So you'll see these numbers here, the 517, 660,000. That's the general fund given to us for SALPOT. They also gave us another 150,000 in funding for the RENA work, which is specialized to this biennium that was passed in the long session. And then the other curious number you might see is this economic development pilot project that started a couple biennia ago as a project with the city of Madras. And this is just limitation due to some technicalities. The appropriation closed and we had to reopen it because we should be finishing that work this biennium and then returning whatever leftover funds to Madras. And it's not that amount, that was just the amount they put in there. So Carol touched a little bit probably on the cash flow. I know she touched on it in the last commission meeting. That still hasn't been cleared up. OEM is really having issues being short-staffed in their accounting department. So we are in touch with them. However, we're managing the cash flow situation on our side through accounting. The budget build has kicked off. We have our actuals reconciliation in for last biennium, which was just really a matter, it was real simple, just some rounding stuff to take care of. And we'll be moving on in the middle of this month, 2 more weeks, to them opening the statewide budget system and getting ready to build next biennium's budget already. I think Carol also spoke about how the governor's budget is going to be different this year. I think at one of our statewide budget meetings, they said first time in 12 years that we know we will have a change in the governorship. And so we will not be getting the governor's requested budget or recommended budget on December 1st, but probably by February 1st from whoever the new governor is. And you've been hearing about the POPs, the agency request. So that, of course, is many weeks in the budget schedule down the line. And yeah, I'm open for any questions, but I just wanted to let you know as a commission, this is a really exciting time actually to work in budget. You don't hear that probably often, but DLCD being a smaller agency, it's great for a budget person because you get this statewide view, but you also get what happens to the money in a program view. And just the money coming to our agency and knowing the quality and staff, their skills and their integrity, I think it's a really exciting time to be involved in DLCD's budget. So with that, I'll take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Rochelle. And I will just kind of play off of what you just said. And it really goes back to Director Rue and his tenure with the department along with Deputy Director Green. I think that clearly the way it works is if an agency isn't showing progress toward really important goals that the legislature and the governor is interested in, but presumably the entire public, then they don't get any money, and in fact they get defunded. And because of the work of this department over the past couple of years, especially focused on housing and climate and equity, and those sorts of things, clearly we're being viewed as a value add agency as opposed to an agency that legislature might target for cutbacks. So I'm glad you talked about the budget. So the ramifications of that, of us doing the kind of implementation and focusing on real issues on the ground, is that we're being recognized, and it's the work of this commission as well as the department that has made that happen.
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. Thanks for that connection.
A question, Commissioner Lilac.
Thank you, Chair. I'm curious, yeah, also going back to Director Rue's just summary of staffing changes, aside from the retirements, just the salary pot appropriation. I'm just curious what you think, and Kirsten, Deputy Director and Director Rue think. Is that sufficient to sustain your staffing levels and for staff recruitment and retention? I mean, I know you're doing something to attract some planners from some local governments like ours, but the larger picture is I really hope it is, because of the work that Director Rue summarized that the agency has accomplished over the past 4 years. I think it's foretelling for what's coming over the next 4 years. So sustaining those staffing levels is going to be critical. I'm just curious your thoughts of, is the salary pot appropriation adequate? Should it to sustain staffing levels?
Thanks, Commissioner Lilac. It absolutely is adequate for where we are in the budget cycle. One, I think, is the great revenue situation our state finds itself in, better maybe than was projected a couple years ago. Two, it has to do, it's not as great, but it has to do with what you're saying about the recruiting. There's, sorry about that. It's kind of, hitting us too, that it seems like sometimes for every 2 people we bring in, a person leaves. And it's just my kind of personal view that we're just going through a big public sector shuffle right now as folks move around because of the good economy affecting not only our state budgets, probably local governments, nonprofit governments, everybody's bottom line, right? Even the private sector. So it's kind of exciting in the overview to be part of this. This big shuffle is going on. People are finding better fits and advancing their skills, but from a day-to-day work thing, it's hard, right? You have a lot of turnover. From a budget perspective, it makes things really easy because we have a higher amount of vacancy savings at this point in the budget cycle than we would normally. And it's not a huge amount, but it's enough of a comfortable cushion that this SALPOT is more than adequate.
Deputy Director Green.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur, Commissioner Lilac, and Michelle. Such a good presentation. I wondered if Jim wanted to weigh in on and Rochelle is accurate. I just have a sort of a footnote, but would defer to Jim if he had anything to add in response to Commissioner Lulak's question, if he's able to speak to us. He may be in between worlds trying to connect a different way. But the only footnote I would make is, Commissioner Lulak, thank you for that. I would not be surprised if Commissioner Lulak was able to sense sort of through Zoom, for example, the CFEC team's stress of trying to accomplish everything in an aggressive time frame, which is required by the situation, our environmental situation. So it is tight. Those, you have also probably heard we have two new people, adding to that team right now, MA and Ryan, in addition to the 5 core team members you've seen for the last 2 years. So that's helpful. However, it's just the importance of our policy option packages and those positions described there, I cannot emphasize more. If we are not successful in those policy option packages, we will really have to take a different look at what we'll be doing in the next 2 years. Those are, I would say, those policy option packages, because many continue the work that's currently, for example, at Evan's position, which allowed MA to come on. So if we're not able to convert those into permanent positions and or request the additional positions we've described, we won't be able to do the work that we're set up to do. Currently, I think we're getting by, but there is an opportunity cost. There are things we're not getting to. But Rochelle is absolutely accurate that we're in a good place on the budget, a very solid place on the budget, as you've just heard. But in terms of, we're somewhere in between good and great in terms of like being able to do the work. If we're not able to achieve those policy option packages, will be a stretch to hang on to good. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Kirsten, so any other questions about budget? Not seeing any. Thank you, Rochelle. Very much appreciate you, all the work you do, but also being here today in Carol's absence.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur. Thanks to all of you for your work.
Let's move over to Sadie. Good morning, Sadie. And this is the Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee discussion. And I think you're going to bring in Steve Faust as well, but we'll just let you take it away. Hi, Steve.
Good morning, Chair MacArthur and Commissioners. Sadie Carney, Policy Analyst, Communications Manager, and the lucky staff member who gets to serve as a liaison to the Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee, which is where I met Steve Faust when we were both members of the CIAC. Turns out the CIAC is a very effective recruiting tool. We've gotten a couple of regional reps, including Lisa Phipps, who is now, as you recently heard, been promoted. So I'm actively recruiting Steve at all times. I just want everyone here to know that. But we're both here this morning to answer any questions about the CIAC, but specifically to present our work plan for 2022. I'm happy to share my screen. I have a little trouble with VPN, so I have it up in a tab on my browser, which is the best way to view it. So why don't I go ahead and do that? And Steve, would you like to say good morning to our commission?
Sure, thank you, Sadie. Good morning, Chair MacArthur and Commission. Steve Faust, Chair of the Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee. And today I would like to present the CIAC work plan for 2022. Work plan items were agreed upon at our January 28th meeting and then refined by DLCD staff for presentation to you today. This work plan isn't a binding document. We often add or remove items throughout the course of the year to reflect committee and agency needs, but it does give us a sense of direction and helps establish priorities for the year ahead. So without further ado, the first item on the work plan is creating the work plan itself, which, as I said, we agreed to at our last meeting. Priorities for the committee this year include a focus on Goal 1, as well as enhancing agency efforts to engage Oregonians and on DLCD work related to climate change. So those really emerged in our conversation as our key priorities. Sadie, if you could scroll to the second item, which is recruitment. That's the next item. We are currently recruiting for 2 positions representing congressional districts 3 and 5. Another recruitment will be conducted again in January when the new congressional map for Oregon, including a 6th congressional seat, becomes official. According to our CIAC bylaws, we must have 1 representative from each of Oregon's congressional districts, and there are also several at-large positions. The current recruitment will close on April 19th. Applications will be reviewed by CIAC members at our April 29th meeting, and then recommendations for appointment will be advanced to the commission for your May 2022 meeting. And I have to pause here briefly to thank Kirsten and Sadie and Casaria and all of the DLCD staff members that helped design and implement the recruitment process from last year, which resulted in us having nearly a full slate of members and really the most diverse group of people and voices that CIAC has had on my time with the committee. So thanks to you all for leading that effort.
Hey, Steve, I see Commissioner Lelak's hand up.
Oh, I see that. Okay.
Can we take a question?
Commissioner Lelak, yeah.
Just a quick question. Thank you. The recruitment is for currently Congressional District 5. I was just curious. I think I'm currently sitting in Congressional District 2, and it's going to become Congressional District 5. And I was just curious. I was tracking to the best that I could. I was just curious. So the current recruitment is for Congressional District 5, and then it'll change next year?
I'll answer that question if you'd like, Steve. That's correct, Commissioner Lelak. So right now, because we have these vacancies and are conducting a recruitment for congressional districts 3 and 5, we're using the map that is effective today. The new map, which includes the 6th congressional district, will become effective in January of 2023. And at that time, we will recruit for the 6th congressional district. We'll have to do a little work with our CIAC in the interim to figure out if somebody's already sitting in the new congressional district, but it's very difficult to discern at this time. One, because in our recruitment forms, we simply ask for which congressional district you live or work in, and we don't ask for a point location address. So it's hard to know when the lines shift what will be filled. And I'm going to point out a typo in my work plan right now. We have 7 of 10 members. And so the 10th seat is reserved for that 6th congressional district. So I, with the commission's permission, will make that correction in the work plan and repost it to our website after following this meeting. But there's a little typo in there. But if that answers your question, I hope it does. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Then we'll move on to our third work plan item, which is the ACE Awards. This is also currently underway, this effort for the Achievement in Community Engagement Awards application process. Each year, with some exception in recent years, the CIAC recognizes excellence in community engagement through these awards. In addition, this year, in addition to reviewing applications and making recommendations about which efforts to recognize, the CIAC will also undergo a comprehensive review of the award description, application tools, and evaluation methods. Those were all developed, I guess, probably about 5 years ago, and it's just time for another look at them to make sure they reflect the diversity, equity, inclusion, and racial justice work of DLCD in particular. The current CIAC, as I mentioned, due to the excellent recruitment effort, the previous effort, comes close to reflecting the diversity of Oregon as a whole. And we're excited about the input and improvements that this group is going to bring to the ACE Awards process. And the fourth and final item on our work plan is rulemaking processes in 2022 and 23. Just as the CIAC reviews and comments on the policy agenda each year, In keeping with the agency's public participation guidelines, CIAC members review individual policy development issues for the department. Most often, we're engaged at or near the beginning of a project to provide feedback on proposed community engagement activities. And then in addition, CIAC members have the opportunity to participate in advisory groups and rulemaking committees in cases where we feel the issue has an important public involvement component. In the work proposed on DLCD's biennial policy agenda, there has been interest from CIAC members in participating on several of these policy development efforts. Currently, Leah Rausch is serving on the stakeholder group for the Wildfire Adapted Communities work that will implement Senate Bill 762. And Jennifer Isola and Artemio Paz are participating in the Climate Change Vulnerability Adaptation Advisory Team. And then while not strictly policy efforts, the CIAC is also planning to participate in the development of DLCD's DEI and racial equity plan and provide feedback to staff in the development of the DLCD strategic plan. So there's a lot ahead this coming year, and really excited about the group we have. We're looking forward to diving into this work plan. Finally, in the spirit of transitions that we're hearing about today, this is the last time that I'll have the pleasure of appearing before you as a member or chair of the CIAC. I've been on the CIAC for 9 years, so I am well beyond the limit of my second 4-year term. My term was extended for a year by the commission so I could help manage the recruitment and onboarding of our new members last year. In my time on the CIAC, I've seen it evolve quite a bit, and I think in a good positive way to address the current needs of DLCD and LCDC and Oregonians. I really appreciate the support of our commissioner liaisons, which has been terrific throughout, and especially to Chair MacArthur and former Commissioner Piermine for the time and energy that they invested in CIAC that really demonstrated the importance and the value that the commission places on community engagement. And then likewise, I appreciate the support and guidance of staff, Kirsten and Sadie and Casaria and everyone that they provide to the CIAC to help our work. So with this great new group of members and Commissioner Sandoval and Warren as liaisons to the committee, I'm really excited about the future of this group and what they're going to do going forward. So thank you. And if you have any questions about the work plan, Sadie and I are happy to answer those.
Well, I will start actually with questions about the work program, but I do want to take a moment at the end to really celebrate you, Steve. You just have been a rock during this whole thing, and you were the chair of the committee when I first came on board and felt it was important to connect and be the liaison to that effort, because goal 1 is so important. Public engagement, citizen involvement are just really the bedrock of what we do, because we are partners in this with the communities across the state. So we'll talk a little bit in a minute about kind of to celebrate you, take that moment. But I do want to ask commissioners if they have questions about the work program first. Don't see any, so we can go right into celebration. Sadie, do you want to say something about the work program or final notes? I don't want to.
No, I just wanted to thank Steve for all of the many years we have spent together in service to the CIAC and to the department. He has been a visionary. He has been a change agent. He has been a great leader to the CIAC. He's been a terrific sounding board and a very calming influence on my sometimes very excited approach to things. I mean, his facilitation of our meetings and the way that he has welcomed people into and on the CIAC and welcomed their participation has made a huge, huge difference. And so Steve, I just want to say, I'm really going to miss you. Thank you so much. And I'll let others speak up.
Thank you, Sadie.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as well. This is charades, I guess, because it's a virtual setting. So I'll go like this first, and then celebrate this with balloons second, because I'm sad to see you go. But you really are. You've been really amazing. You have been a rock, and you've really overseen the transition of the CIAC, as well as Sadie. Sadie's been an incredible advocate for us elevating that work and that committee in the agency. And so I want to give kudos to Sadie and others who have done that, and Kirsten and others have done that. It's so important, especially the kind of rulemaking we're doing now. It really does affect very directly the lives and of people, community members, how they get around. And you've always championed the idea of equity and inclusion. And I don't think all the commissioners, in fact, most of the commissioners weren't there, but really a highlight of one of our commission engagements with the CIAC, in my mind anyway, was the Tigard panel, the panel that you put together in Tigard. It was so powerful. And I'd really, I'm going to be off the commission, but I would really encourage maybe in the fall timeframe, when things kind of calm down a little bit, if they ever do in this world, that maybe there isn't a desire or a need for another panel. I'm not saying that you would be in charge of that, Steve, because you've already volunteered enough, but if folks could take a look at what that panel did, it really described different perspectives, how to communicate with new entrants to the process, what we needed to do, what we needed to understand as a commission. And it was really eye-opening, eye-popping to me to realize it's not just more engagement to individuals, it's understanding how those individuals might receive that information and how we can connect with them in a meaningful way and not just flood people with information. It's really an engagement. And I think you put the engagement piece back into the citizen involvement part of what we do. So thank you for that.
Chair?
Yes.
I was going to say that Tigard meeting probably was one of my most memorable, if not my most memorable meetings also, because of the same reason. I think it just really energized us, and it made us see like a whole new, it was sort of like the beginning of all the work we've done recently, like a whole new, what's planning for now. And I thought it was great also because it showed, that the state could be a leader in this area, because we're essentially requesting that all of these jurisdictions do this type of work, and us doing that first, I think, was important. And so, yes, I wanted to commend you on the work and sort of the turnaround. It just seemed like really new and refreshing, and your work really shows. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Lilac.
Thank you. Steve, your service has just been extraordinary. As I look back at the work plan, Sadie, maybe I'm hopeful that we can nominate Steve for an ACE award.
I love that idea.
Really extraordinary service to the state, to us, to communities, so much. So thank you, Steve, so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I know that we have really good liaisons in the way of Commissioner Warren and Commissioner Sandoval, and that's just to have two liaisons to an effort of involving the public and engagement. I just think is a really rich signal to the outside world and those committee members that we really take this very seriously and want to continually be in an improvement mode about how to connect with folks.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Steve. Commissioner Ward, did you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry. I should just say thank you too, Steve. I feel like I just started to get to know you, and now you're leaving, so that's sad. But I will try to help usher the next person through into your position as best I can. So thank you for all you've done for Oregon, and I'm sure that will continue, knowing a little bit about what you do. So thanks again.
Thank you. You're left in good hands with the group we have. So good luck.
Thank you. Sadie, do you want to wrap this up? Is that your hands up?
Sure, I would like to. I just would say I have a hard time imagining Steve doing anything but leaving it better than he found it. And that's really been the case for the CIAC. So just again, many, many thanks, deep appreciation. I'll miss you so much. And I just wanted commissioners to know that I have captured notes about doing something to recreate a panel similar to the one that Steve led for commissioners, because it's really great, I think, for me and for both of us to hear the feedback about what an impact that had for commissioners. And so to the extent that we can sort of keep the energy behind that and keep the perspectives and the learning happening on the commission, I'm happy to facilitate that in whatever way I can. So, and I think that's it for the CIAC. You will hear from us again at your next meeting with recommendations for appointment to the CIAC for the 2 congressional seats that are currently vacant. That recruitment is going pretty well. We're going to do another push on it here to get the information out. But looking forward to seeing what lies ahead for our group, and big thanks to Commissioners Warren and Sandoval who are helping us steward this from a commission perspective. So thank you all.
Thank you. Final thanks to Steve, and thank you, Sadie, for everything you did to champion this effort. It's really, really important. So great. Let's move on to touch base really a little bit on the Local Officials Advisory Committee met, I think, on Monday of this week, which is very exciting. There was a hiatus due to a lot of reasons, but mainly the pandemic. And Commissioner Jacobson is our liaison to that effort. So I wanted to take a moment and turn to you and see if you want to say anything about the first meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman MacArthur. And we had our first meeting, and I think it went really well. There was lots of issues that were brought up that were our next meeting, and I think everyone was overall very excited to have the opportunity to participate. And I think staff also did an excellent job, and definitely a little bit of herding squirrels just in terms of the diversity of people and where they come from and the issues that they face from a land use perspective. But I think it's going to be a really great group, and looking forward to working with them. And like I said, we had a really nice discussion on kind of the goal of the group and the types of issues they want to get into as we progress. So it was great. I'm sure Deputy Director Green or others want to weigh in as well.
Deputy Director Green, would you want to say anything about that? Thank you, Commissioner.
Sure, Chair MacArthur and Commissioner Jacobson, thank you. Sadie Carney and Steve Faust are really hard act to follow, so I'm just trying to get it together here. But the credit of standing up this committee goes to Esther Johnson as well. She did ask me to help carry this morning, given that they're still fighting with the VPN and trying to get not just commissioner on, but all staff are kind of in hiatus with that too. So people are working on that. But thanks to Commissioner Jacobson for leading us and being their coastal representative. We are really struggling to achieve the statutory requirement, which is that the LOAC should be representative of the state's geography and diversity with just 6 members. So Commissioner Jacobson kindly said that she would do double or triple duty. I'm not sure how much, but both being our liaison and our kind of liaison, LCDC liaison to LOAC, but also representing coastal issues. So we are framing up a bylaws change there. We got some really interesting feedback from Commissioner Colm Willis on the committee in particular, who said, hey, if you make it too big, I'm out, because he really wants to have an advisory role and not just be talked to. So we said we'd keep it under 10 because we really want to keep Commissioner Willis on. We don't want to lose him now that we've just met him. So we'll just make probably a modest recommendation in July to the commission regarding a bylaws change for that committee, and then also look to expand it by just a couple seats to achieve, in particular, Southern Oregon representation, as well as perhaps coastal and Central Oregon. We kind of have a little gap too of larger cities. So we're matrixing again sort of the geographic and kind of size of community perspectives from around the state really enthusiastic about the group. If we can just get out of the way, they have lots to say. So we're making the meetings 2 hours. The first meeting was just an hour, giving folks time. So that was a rush overview, but Esther is polling everybody right now on their issues they'd like to discuss. We know that urban growth boundaries is a major kind of flashpoint and issue. On our next meeting, we plan to brief them on the work of the housing team in particular with respect to the regional housing needs analysis, since that'll be coming up and strong in terms of a policy agenda item for commission and the legislature, and also the housing and land use work group subset of that work. We'll go over the POPs with them as well in June, so that they have an opportunity to give feedback as well on the amount of funds that we're requesting for local government implementation, to Chair MacArthur's point earlier. And then we'll be looking to elect a chair and a vice chair of LOAC, and probably early on in the agenda, Commissioner Jacobson recommended a roundtable format so that LOAC members can bring anything else up that was not on the agenda. So we'll either do that at the beginning or the end of the agenda, but somewhere. And thank you, Commissioner Jacobson, for your early feedback on our next agenda item. Unless there's any questions or corrections from Director Rue, who really the director really presides over LOAC. Esther and I are staff support. But I'm not sure if Jim is even, here, yeah, he is on. So Jim, I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that. Otherwise, I'll wrap it up. I know you have a tight agenda today, this morning. Chair MacArthur, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Director Green. And I know that you've worked really hard with other folks to really get this committee up and running again. And I'm reaching into the future past my tenure, but if I recall correctly, in the past, when I first was on the commission, there were touch points between LOAC and the commission. And I found that as a commission member very valuable to hear from LOAC directly. And so I don't know if you can figure out timing, you and Commissioner Jacobson can figure out the timing on that. But I think those actual touch points where they are invited to commission meetings or a roundtable or whatever, just so we hear directly from those important voices, elected voices around the state, was a rich experience for me. And perhaps you can encourage that to happen sometime next year or so, or 6 months. So
definitely. Thank you.
Director Rue, do you have anything to add to the LOAC conversation? You're on mute. Maybe you're not even there. We're not hard to know, but
it's hard. If I may, Chair MacArthur, Director Rue, if it's *6 on your phone, if you're participating by phone, I know. There you go.
Right. Gosh.
Do you hear me now?
We do hear you now. Thank you.
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, just so then we want to make sure we're done by 10 so we get our break and then go into executive session. But I wanted to highlight a couple things. I'll talk in a moment about the director recruitment process in the public setting. But first of all, at our last commission meeting, there was interest on the part of commissioners in getting an early signal about the transition, who might be the new chair, who might be the new vice chair of the commission. So Vice Chair Holova and others have talked about that. She's reached out to other folks. And we ultimately decided that we wouldn't take an official vote today. That would be confusing. In fact, I think we even confused Esther. Esther thought this was my last meeting. So if we've confused our internal staff, then we would certainly, it'd be confusing to take a vote now, even if it were effective post the May meeting. So we're not going to do that. But it would be important to respond to Commission's interest in having an early signal about who might be elected by this commission, chair and vice chair. I'll start with chair. I just think Vice Chair Holova would be the perfect chair, should my colleagues agree. I think you probably all do. She's been amazing on so many fronts. Just her understanding of the development world is really valuable to this commission, and I think it would send a signal to the outside world that we are in fact about development and conservation. And the fact that she brings a wealth of knowledge, lived knowledge and experience in terms of diversity and equity, and she brings that voice to this commission, as others do as well. So we're not voting today, but I would encourage my comrades, my colleagues on the commission, to vote for her as chair come May. And I will just turn it over to Anjali, because I think you also want to signal perhaps who you've been talking with to be perhaps vice chair come May.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Such kind, nice words. Good Friday. So fellow commissioners, I hope that you would support my transition into being chair of the commission. And I would like to nominate, I say nominate because I don't actually know the formal process, Commissioner Nick Lilac to be my vice chair. And I just wanted to say a couple words about it. So I believe our entire commission shares a passion, obviously, for maximizing public benefit for all Oregonians to meet the needs of our community. And really in the last, I think the Community Involvement Committee shows giving a voice to the voiceless, I think is really important in our work. And so we know that the future of the department has to meet these equitable outcomes and sustainable solutions to be relevant for our future challenges. And really when it comes to implementing this work, it's a partnership between state, regional, and local governments, but also the private sector. And thank you, Chair, for mentioning that. And so, I think we've seen recently that the public sector really is about framework and processes, and we hope in many cases now about providing resources. And then a lot of times in our work, the private sector is about providing the execution of some of that work. And so while both Commissioner Lilac and I care about outcomes and processes, I think we have different strengths given his leadership role in cities and counties and my role as a small BIPOC-owned business owner. And so I hope you would support this decision, and I look forward to the future of our work. And I really would love to say some words about the chair, but I think I'll hold them to the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Lilac.
Well, thank you. I'm honored and humbled to be nominated if that's the correct process, to serve as vice chair, and I certainly welcome it. It's just a tremendous honor and to serve along with our incoming chair in that capacity would really be terrific. And she and I've had great conversations about exactly what she just discussed, as we come from different perspectives, different geographic locations, different strengths, and I think together, along with the strength of our entire commission, we'll continue to do great work together for years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Any commissioners want to comment? And we won't take the official vote, obviously, till May, but just I think that Anjali has circled around and tried to get a hold of each commissioner to let them know what her thinking is. But Commissioner Warren.
Yeah, I just want to say that the chance to have both of you in leadership positions for this commission is extremely exciting to me, and I fully support it. I just think that the dynamic between you two would be very welcomed, I think, for Oregonians, as well as this commission and our staff. I think that Nick brings a unique set of skills, as does Anjali, and the combination of those two skills in a leadership position is really powerful. So I hope you both accept, and you have my support.
Thank you. I think with that,
I mouth thank you. I'll turn it up and say thank you.
I think with that, we'll have a more formal conversation in May and a motion, etc. But just wanted to make sure that we honor the commission's request to have sort of an early signal about that transition. So thanks to everybody, especially to Anjali and Nick. I couldn't be happier with that combination of skill set in a leadership role, as Commissioner Warren mentioned. Great. So then the final thing I wanted to discuss in the public setting before we go into a private executive session to interview our top two candidates, I wanted to describe for the public the process we have gone through. And so last September, I got the call from Director Rue saying he was wanting to move on to other exciting things in life. And so worked with him and others to kind of get together a packet of materials that we brought to the commission at the November meeting, outlining what we were looking for in a director, the recruitment process, the fact that we wanted to make sure we did more outreach than traditionally has been done to make sure we outreach to more diverse communities out there than traditionally we have done. And I think that DAS has already been doing that, but we added more activities to that. This body agreed to those, to the packet at our November meeting, the content of that, the application materials. We went public with that application on December 1st. It was initially going to be on the street for about 6 weeks, and then we got an early notice that coming close to the deadline, middle of January, that we didn't think there were only about 3 or 4 people had applied. So we extended that recruitment for at least another week, perhaps 10 days. I forget the exact date. So it was really on the street for about 7 or 8 weeks. Then at the January meeting, you agreed to the subcommittee of this commission, the recruitment subcommittee, and that's Vice Chair Holova and Commissioner Lilac, to shepherd this process from the application stage to narrowing it down to candidates. We met, I think it was late January, early February, after DAS. And I should mention, Taylor Sorgenfrey, our amazing HR director, has been really a very instrumental part of this whole process. The subcommittee met early in, maybe it was February. And there were 15 applications that were submitted, only 10 of which met minimum qualifications. So the 3 of us went through those applications, ranked them according to, we use criteria to rank them based on the attributes that this commission is looking for in a director. So we had that scorecard, we went through that, we narrowed it down to, I think it was 4 or 5. I forget the number exactly, but we agreed to interview, I think, 5 people, one of whom decided at the last minute to drop out. So I think ultimately we interviewed 4, but Taylor can correct me. I don't think it's relevant necessarily. We interviewed the finalists that we thought that would be for that phase. We then agreed on 2 final finalists at the end of February, I think it was. And you have those resumes and background material on those folks in the supplemental packet that Taylor sent earlier this week. And we all agreed as a commission, as part of the process, we would make sure that DL City staff had a chance to meet and greet those candidates. There was it worked out really well. I think it was Kirsten's idea to include the interviews or the meets and greets. Actually, it's not really an interview, meet and greet time frame with those two finalists at the all staff meeting that was held in March. So it was already on all staffs, each and every member of DLC staff, it was on their calendar. So it gave them a chance to listen in. I think that staff asked 4 or 5 questions of both candidates, and then we sent out a survey to ask folks, what are your general thoughts? We're not asking them to choose, but we wanted to get their input on that. And at the executive session, Taylor will give you the summary of that material. Then there was a meet and greet with external stakeholders, because this commission felt that was an important thing as well. That happened sometime in May. I'm not getting my dates exactly right in my brain. And we invited commissioners to participate in that. We did notify that as a public meeting, so you all were invited. I think Commissioner Boyer and Vice Chair Holova and I were the ones that showed up. But in fact, we also provided a summary survey and got input on that. And again, Taylor will go over a summary of that. Those surveys in our executive session. So we're here today with the top 2 finalists. So that's sort of the process and how we got here today. I'd like to ask commissioners if they have any questions about the process or where we're going. We'll obviously do the confidential conversations in executive session, but then we'll come out in public after lunch today and deliberate, do our final consideration, and take a vote on that director. So feel free to add in, Taylor, if I've forgotten something, because you're my gauge on all that stuff. You've been just a really important, critical role. You play a critical role in this. So if I forgot anything, please add it. And then commissioners, if you have any questions to clarify where we are.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur. You did a wonderful job with that overview. I have nothing to add, but I am happy to answer any questions as well from the commission.
Thank you. So seeing none and seeing no negative reaction from our attorney about what I've done or haven't done, I will close this meeting for right now. And then you get a break until, let's just come back. It's 9:55, so let's come back at 10 after 10. And we will talk about that and introduce the candidates. Thanks, everybody. See you in a little bit.
Recording stopped.
Welcome back, everybody. For the public's information, we had an executive session before lunch that ran well into lunch regarding interviews of our top 2 candidates for the director position. And let me just say that it's a really tough decision, probably one of the tougher decisions I've been involved in this area. And in particular, because Jim Rue's shoes are so big to fill. Generally, the reason it's a difficult decision is because the candidates have a lot of integrity. They're dedicated public servants. They're very, very talented. All the reviews came back from stakeholders and staff and everything to really support both candidates. They're well liked. They nurture employees. We specifically asked questions about employee relations and in terms of how they might nurture staff and DEI work, and they both were very strong on those fronts. So really, it's a very tough decision. We talked a lot about it. We want to come back. We wanted to come back in public session to take a vote. And I think without belaboring it any further, I will ask one of my colleagues if they have anything to say and or want to make a motion.
Chair MacArthur, I'll just state that I've been involved in the interview process from the beginning and echo your comments that 2 just extraordinary candidates and a highly, highly competitive process. And I'm certainly pleased to make a motion if you wish, or I can defer to other commission candidates for any other commissioners for any other comments.
I will look and see if we have any. I don't see any hands up, so I would appreciate a motion, Commissioner.
Okay, and perhaps Steve can correct me if I don't make the motion properly, but I'll move that the Land Conservation and Development Commission appoint Dr. Brenda Bateman as director of the Department of Land Conservation and Development.
Contingent
upon the final background checks and pay equity analysis?
Basically, I think we can say contingent on pre-employment review, I think are the words that we might use. It might include more than those things. Hard to know. Thank you.
I'll second it.
Great. So we have, thank you. We have a motion by Commissioner Lilac, a second by Commissioner Sandoval, and any discussion? Not seeing or hearing any. Esther, would you call the roll?
Yes, Chair. Commissioner Warren.
Aye.
Commissioner Boyer.
Aye.
Vice Chair Holova.
Aye.
Commissioner Jacobson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lilac.
Aye.
Commissioner Sandoval.
Aye.
And Chair MacArthur.
Aye. The motion passes unanimously with all members present. And a special thanks to Gerard, Commissioner Sandoval, for tuning in for this piece. We know that you might need to be excused to go back to the Housing Stability Council discussion, but thanks for being part of this.
Actually, that meeting ended, I think. So.
Okay, well, we have you for a while. That's wonderful. Thank you. Okay. It seems like such a momentous decision that it's hard to just jump back out of the agenda, but I think I need to do that. So agenda item number 8, I think, is the next one. Is that right? Yeah. Legislative session summary. And I want to welcome Emma and Palmer.
Hello. Can everybody hear me? Because I'm using these headphones for the first time.
Yes. Yeah.
I kind of feel like I'm flying a plane. Good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, my name is Emma Land. I'm gonna get our presentation pulled up and share the screen. I'm also here with my colleague Palmer.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, Palmer.
Okay, that should be good. Is everybody seeing the actual PowerPoint?
Yes.
So, okay. Well, let's jump right into it. So we are here to give you a summary of the 2022 legislative session. It feels like it was forever ago, but it really wasn't. Alrighty. So like I said, we're just going to run through a quick summary. We'll talk about the high priority bills and issues that staff here tracked. And then, of course, take any questions, have a discussion with you. For a quick highlight, so the session began February 1st. It ended March 4th. Fortunately, the legislature experienced a surplus in revenue. And because of that, they chose to allocate money to various areas and programs all over, such as affordable housing and homelessness. There was workforce development, summer learning assistance, rural communities, just a lot, which is really great. But this session in particular was interesting for a couple reasons. I feel like the summary that we're going to give you today is less of a summary of what happened and more of kind of a look to what we're going to expect in the future. And that's because this session and this year is very transitional for legislators and for agencies. So previous former speaker, Kotek, she stepped down so that she could run for governor. So this session, we had a new House Speaker, Ray Field. This was also current Senate President Courtney's last session. So we're going to see a new Senate President. There's a number of new legislators and they're kind of taking on new roles, leadership responsibilities. And because it's a re-election year, a number of members announced that they wouldn't run for re-election. And then, of course, we've got Governor Brown's term is ending this year and we're going to see a new governor in the next couple of months. So a lot is to come is the point, I think I would say. Palmer, do you want to add anything before I jump into our bills?
No, I think that covers it, and it speaks to the volume of change that's about to happen.
Alrighty, so on this slide, what I want to point out before we jump into this is that the first top row of bills here, categories, these bills can be considered bills that actually directly changed land use laws or had some sort of direct effect to the agency. And then the bottom row, bills that didn't necessarily change land use laws, but tangentially have quite an interest for the agency. So you can maybe kind of just think about those in that way. I will jump into the housing category first. House Bill 4064. This was a bill that was championed by Representative Marsh, and it focuses on manufactured and prefabricated homes. So the bill restricts local governments from prohibiting or providing any sort of unique or different standards for manufactured or prefabricated homes, whether they're inside or outside of an official manufactured dwelling. So basically, it just clarifies that these homes cannot be subject to any standards that are different from what are applied to any other type of home dwelling in that same land. So the next one I want to talk about is House Bill 4118. You'll notice that this bill is highlighted in orange. Bills that are in orange did not pass this session, but I did want to bring a couple of these up because they're pretty important conversations that we're likely going to continue to have with stakeholders and with the legislature. So it's important just for us to make you aware of them. House Bill 4118, this was a bill that would have allowed landowners to petition for an urban growth boundary expansion without being subject to the current expansion process. It would be for lands that were used for workforce housing. And there are some stipulations that, require that the petitioned land have to be designated as urban reserves, that it would be 100 acres or less and adjacent to a current urban growth boundary. Like I mentioned, this bill didn't pass, but it did spark some serious conversations between the LPD and Representative Fahey, who is the chair of the House Housing Committee. And that kind of leads us into the next bill that I have on the list, which is House Bill 5202. That is the end of session budget reconciliation bill. And the LPD was able to secure an appropriation to expand the current work that we're doing with our regional housing needs analysis. And it's kind of, like I said, related to the conversations that were being had about House Bill 4118 and housing and land supply and what that means for the whole situation. So under this budget note, Representative Fahey wrote a letter which I believe you should have as attachment B, and that provides some direction about how the agency would use the funding to convene a work group to discuss what we'd like to, kind of call a very narrow set of housing and land supply issues around the urban growth boundary. And I do believe that Ethan and Sean are going to be able to give you a couple more details about this process, since they will be providing their large housing update. But the main point is just that we've been given direction to have a more narrowed, productive conversation around housing and land supply. This is something that we anticipated would happen already. So this appropriation really just helps give us the direction, have some sideboards around such a contentious issue. Palmer, would you like to add anything about that?
If I might, Chair MacArthur, I think Emma's really stressing the key point here is we knew this conversation was going to happen and it was gathering momentum for the 2023 session. So we were fortunate to be able to work with Representative Fahey to try to set up some sideboards around this conversation and keep it focused, both within the UGB, addressing housing and land supply, as well as outside the UGB, and kind of tee up a conversation that can maybe be more constructive and perhaps a little less controversial. I mean, it's always a difficult subject, UGBs, but this hopefully gives it a more workable frame.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate your work and Emma's to recognize this opportunity, so to speak, and channel it in the right way. So thank you.
All right, well then, if there are no other questions on that, I'll switch to this final bill that's in this category, Senate Bill 1537. So you'll notice this is another bill that did not pass. It is highlighted in orange. So this bill would have changed the current process for providing housing cost impact statements. So current law does require DLCD and others to conduct a housing cost impact statement when considering rulemaking. This bill would have changed what is looked at in that process, and it also would have added a couple different agencies to do that work. Essentially, it would have required agencies to identify the estimated effects of whatever the proposed rulemaking might be on the development costs for certain housing types that are between 80 to 150% median family income. There would also be a requirement for agencies to produce some findings on what the effects might be on displacement of historically disadvantaged community members and low-income families, and as well as findings related to the ability to purchase housing in that median family income. This bill kind of went through a couple discussions and an amendment process where it evolved to establishing a task force that would conduct a pretty comprehensive review of that current housing cost impact statement process, and then have the task force provide recommendations about how things would need to be updated. But ultimately, it did not make it out of committee. And I think there's a chance that this kind of conversation will happen for a future session. So as the amendment was written as it stands right now, that could be potentially a jumping off point. Well, I'm happy to switch to wildfires if we're ready for that.
Do commissioners have any questions about, this is some pretty important stuff that Emma is going over. Our commissioners have any questions about these pieces of rules, legislation? Not seeing any. Okay, thank you.
Chair, I had a little bit of a question about the manufactured home one and the intent behind that one, because one could assume different intents based on what you said. So I was more curious what the intent of that one was.
I think the intent was really to just encourage, rebuilding, or areas that maybe lost homes for wildfire, that they wouldn't have any issues in trying to, because I think manufactured and prefabricated homes are fairly low cost from my very minimal understanding. So I think that was just kind of a hope of like finding an easy solution or an option for additional housing.
Yeah, if I may, Vice Chair, the fires in Southern Oregon now over a year and a half ago disproportionately displaced people at the lower end of the income scale. In this particular instance, a lot of farm workers. And the concern was, and continues to be, that real estate developers are coming in and trying to buy up some of those former mobile home parks and perhaps would convert them. And so it would leave the community with a real lack of farm worker housing. And this has been an issue of Rep Marsh for, well, ever since the fires and even before.
Thank you, and Deputy Director.
Thanks. If I may, Chair MacArthur and Vice Chair Holoba, thanks. Just amplifying what Director Ryu had said, but perhaps the partial personal interest of yours, Vice Chair, is that the mass modular timber movement also was super glad to see this this bill. As the Director said, and as Emma said, this just provides many more options for the rapid replacement of homes. And we're in a phase one work of the Build Back Better Regional Challenge of testing codes in 5 wildfire impacted communities in Oregon: Talent, Phoenix, Detroit, Gates, and Lincoln City, to make sure that even with this bill, there's no still clutter in the codes that would confuse developers about mass modular homes, or frankly any manufactured home types, to be allowed in each single family home. So it's really a significant bill. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
If I can just tack on to that conversation about manufactured homes, I read a statistic a couple months ago that said something like 80% of the affordable housing stock in the United States are manufactured homes at this point.
Wow. That's shocking. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a comment, Chair.
I'm sorry, I just can't. I thank you. Just go ahead and
Okay.
I'm toggling between two screens, so I didn't see you. I apologize.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the conversation that it's not just farm workers, but actually forest workers are probably more impacted by this. And most of the forest workers and reforestation and actually fire prevention are Latin American. So it's a big population that was impacted.
Yes, very much so. Deputy Director Green, do you have your hand up again? Oh, okay. Great. We'll turn it back to Emma.
All right. Well, let's talk about wildfires. So Senate Bill 1533, within this bill, it actually addresses two kind of separate issues from previous legislation. So the first one that I'll note is I think this group is pretty familiar now with Senate Bill 762 from last session. That was the omnibus wildfire legislation. And in that bill, it of course directed DLCD to start working on doing a report of what updates might need to be done to the land use program to ultimately minimize wildfire risk. And the thing about the way that bill was written is that there was a little bit of confusion, or some people could have read it to be that DLCD was identifying these recommendations and then actually making the updates. And that was not the intent. So Senate Bill 1533 essentially just kind of provided a little bit of clarification, rewrote it to make it very clear that DLCD is simply just identifying, making these recommendations, but then, if those were to be made, that would have to go through future legislation. The second item that DLCD worked on with this bill is also related to a 2021 bill, Senate Bill 391. And that was a bill that would have allowed, well, it does allow counties to authorize an owner in a rural residential area to build an accessory dwelling unit. And of course, there are certain, conditions, local land use regulations that have to be addressed when doing that. However, that bill was written at the same time that Senate Bill 762 was being written. And what happened was in 762, it removed the defensible space guidelines, that reference that Senate Bill 391 was referencing. So because of that, the statute kind of got wonky, and local governments weren't really sure how to comply with the intent of those defensible space guidelines. So Senate Bill 1533 kind of shored everything up and corrected that statutory reference to defensible space statute. Now things work together. Any questions on that?
I don't see any hands up. Thank you.
And also, just a quick clarification note, since we were talking about House Bill 4064, the manufactured dwelling bill. It is limited to lands within urban communities. Well, then let me jump into the prior sessions. We've got 3 different items that DLCD worked on that related to prior sessions. This first one is House Bill 5006. This was from 2021. It was the end of session budget bill for that session. And DLCD also received a budget note in 5006 that appropriated some funding and gave us some direction to continue our regional housing needs analysis work. And so we provided our interim report to the legislature during this short session, and we are expected to provide our full report, which would include recommendations for a potential legislative proposal to how to actually incorporate the RHNA work, and that will occur in December of 2022. Any additions, Palmer, or questions from others? The next one that is pretty short and sweet is House Bill 2918. This was also from the 2021 session, where the bill directed local governments to identify surplus property within an urban growth boundary or rural residential area. And then DLCD has been tasked with creating and maintaining an online database with its inventory. And so we provided a report to the legislature of all of the data that we received and what our database looks like for maintaining that. So again, it was just an update report to the legislature. And this last one is House Bill 2743. This was actually a bill from the 2017 legislature that had to do a pilot project for the city of Madras. The bill required DLCD to establish a pilot program to implement a master plan for economic development in the city of Madras. And now that that pilot program has wrapped up and the project is complete, we provided a report on the process to the legislature. I think earlier this morning I heard Rochelle mention there was a slight budget item kind of related to this that we also needed some assistance from the legislature on, because that bill created a fund basically for us to do all the implementation of the project. But we had leftover resources. We didn't use them all. And so we wanted to return those resources to the city of Madras. But unfortunately, we lost access to that fund. So we just needed to ask the legislature to grant us access back so that we could then pass the funds back over to the city. And we got that fixed, so we should be good. Clean up stuff, if you will. I'll pause if there's any questions on that, and then if not, I can pop down to our bottom row.
Yeah, Emma, I don't see anyone's hand up, so please continue. Thank you.
Commissioner Boyer has her hand raised.
Okay, I just toggled over there and then I went back. Commissioner Boyer, sorry, I didn't see it.
All right, thank you, Chair MacArthur. So House Bill 2918, it was you guys had to supply an inventory of surplus properties within UGB? You guys, meaning the department, sorry.
Right, yes, Commissioner Boyer. So all local governments provided the data to us, and we were tasked with basically creating the database, housing it, maintaining it.
Where can I find that?
That is a great question. I believe in the staff report, we linked directly to it, but also I can find the direct link to it and get it to you. Ethan probably has it as a shortcut at this point.
Okay, thank you. I would appreciate that.
Sure. Okay, I think that's it. So I'm going to hop down to the bottom row. Like I said, these bills down here didn't explicitly change land use laws, but they're of a lot of interest to the department, so we tracked them. And I will just jump right into our first one, which is the Governor's Environmental Justice for All Bill, House Bill 4077. So the Environmental Justice Task Force exists. This bill basically renamed it to the Environmental Justice Council and kind of established it as a permanent fixture within the governor's office. And the other main point of the bill that directs the council, the new Environmental Justice Council, to develop a statewide mapping tool, of course with support of other natural resource agencies and others, to gather environmental justice data. And they're tasked with doing a very rigorous, listening input, feedback from communities to kind of determine how the tool should be developed and what it should be used for. But it will include geospatial data. It'll also include data from other natural resource agencies. That will be good for kind of all of us to put our information in one spot. And the Environmental Justice Council will then provide guidance to state agencies on how we should use this tool when we adopt rules or policies or other guidelines and projects. Questions?
I don't see any.
All right, well, hopping over to our next bill, Senate Bill 1501. Senate Bill 1501 is referred to as the Private Forest Accord Bill. And we have it housed under coastal because it has the potential to restore some federal funding to our coastal program, which is great. Super quick kind of backstory. The Forest Accord was established by the legislature back in 1971, the Oregon Forest Practices Act. And there's a lot of nuances and details to that act. But the main point is that Governor Brown facilitated a mediation between the forest industry and environmental groups back in 2020. They went through a pretty extensive negotiation process and ended up having a successful agreement in 2021, known as the Private Forest Accord Report. Anybody interested, we can take that quite hard. But essentially that report prompted this bill so that the Board of Forestry is directed to adopt one single rule to implement the report. Why are we interested in this? So this is back to the funding piece for our coastal management program. And this is kind of there's a lot of acronyms here, so I'm gonna go slowly. Oregon's Coastal Non-Point Source Pollution Program was disapproved by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, as well as the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, back in 2015 due to forest management practices. And the disapproval resulted in 30% of Oregon's main federal coastal zone management funding to be withheld. To date, that is close to $5 million. So good chunk of change. Now that Senate Bill 1501 has passed and the governor signed it, we do expect that those funds will be restored within 2 years. And one point of clarification is that when I say restored, I mean that we will start receiving those funds again in the future. They unfortunately won't be backdated or backfilled. We won't get all of that $5 million that we didn't receive. But we will 100% receive the future. That makes sense. And I'm sure if anybody has questions, Director Rue knows everything about this.
Yeah, just quickly. Actually, it might have been more than 5 million because I think since 16, so probably 5 million in money that would have gone directly to local cities and towns and counties, local governments on the coast to support their planning departments. And so there was like $1 million a year there. Another $1 million excuse me, was in 2 positions that we lost. And so we've been without those since 15 or 16, whenever it started. And there's still a process to go through at the federal level. NOAA has suggested that they are fine and ready to restore funding with the passage of this bill. We've not heard the same from US EPA. Because they're still concerned about water quality in streams on the seaward side of the Coast Range, in the Middle Coast Range. And so Emma's right, maybe a couple of years, but it really is dependent upon US EPA's analysis of adequacy.
Thanks, Jim. Helpful.
Commissioner Boyer, are you?
Yes, thank you. Yep, I have a question for you, Director Rue. So you said the department lost 2 positions because of this?
Yes.
What were those positions?
I know one of them right away because when it was still available, Kirsten Green, our deputy, applied for that job. We had a guy who was working, I've actually forgotten what his original assignment was, but he became our first climate change adaptation coordinator back in 10th. And so he continued to work in a climate change position, and I'm honestly forgetting what the second position was. And obviously we would hope to restore both of them. Because of the federal budget this last time around, there is a project of special merit and some money that comes with it that would at least for a while replace one of those positions, but we still would like to have them both back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Director Green.
Thanks, Chair MacArthur, Commissioner Boyer, and Director Rue. I think from hearing Patty describe this history, was the other one in the ocean program? Was it something between Paul Claren and Andy's positions that we lost one of the ocean?
Yeah, you're right, Kirsten. Thank you. Because both Paul and Andy were working in ocean stuff, and Andy is currently the only one.
Commissioner Boyer, do you have a follow-up question?
No.
Okay, thank you. Okay, back to Emma.
Okay, thanks for sticking with me. We've got one more bill to cover. Senate Bill 1534, as you can see, this bill is one that did not pass, but it was brought forth by the Oregon Global Warming Commission. It's known as the Natural and Working Lands and Waters Bill. So this bill would have defined natural and working lands and waters in statute and created policy strategies related to carbon sequestration. It would have also created an advisory group that would have developed metrics, strategies, and as well as, creating an inventory of natural and working lands and waters, and looking at economic workforce development related to carbon sequestration. Unfortunately, the bill didn't pass, but I have heard that it's, pretty much the process is already underway, trying to figure out how this conversation and these issues can continue either through future legislation for 2023 or maybe through budget requests from other agencies. So more to come on that.
Commissioner Boyer.
Sorry, just to piggyback on that one. But the legislators did pass $5 million for the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program, which is related to working lands and natural and working lands. So I feel like there's still movement in that direction, not so much the carbon sequestration part, but there is still some movement, and I look forward to seeing this come back before the legislatures.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Boyer, for pointing me out. Okay, I have one more slide for you, but it's going to be very quick. So this is actually, slightly unrelated from the summary of last session, but Deputy Director Green did mention that we are, believe it or not, already launching our process for the budget request for 2023-25 at biennium. So I just wanted to show you this quick slide and make sure that point your attention to a 2-pager that we included as an attachment of our draft budget request that we have here. We have 7 currently as of right now. And we've got some listening sessions coming up. So we are conducting outreach to community members and stakeholders, gathering input, soliciting feedback, seeing if we're asking for the right things in the right ways. You'll notice that several of these policy option packages, or POPs, which is just the same way to say budget requests, several of them are connected to current work that we're doing, like housing, areas, and wildfires. So since those projects are all underway currently, they're also having unique conversations with current work groups and stakeholders. And I certainly anticipate having some more one-on-one conversations with individuals and collecting lots of public comment. So in addition to the listening sessions, we will be providing you with an update at the May Commission meeting on what we've heard. And then in July is when we'll give you kind of our final, here's the group of POPs that we will be submitting. So I have completed my presentation. Any questions? I feel like I talked a lot, so.
No, actually, I kind of want to apologize for me and perhaps other commissioners, although that's not fair of me to do that. I just feel I'm really kind of low energy after our pretty tough decision relative to director. So I'm just kind of low energy, and you did a great job as usual. So I apologize that we weren't as engaged, or I wasn't as engaged as I might have been. So Commissioner Sandoval.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Was the commission involved in, I guess, making recommendations in terms of POPs? And yeah.
I think historically the commission has not been involved in the development discussion, but we have tried to engage the commission in the process of what we're requesting, and of course, bringing it to your attention this early on, because we would like to make sure that we're bringing the right things to the group. I think it's kind of an ever-evolving process, and I will admit, this is still young in the process for DLCD, so I will let others who've been here longer maybe talk about how commission.
Yeah, and maybe Jim could weigh in on this as well, but Commissioner Sandoval, we did talk about that under director's report this morning, and if you have a chance and an interest, you can go back to agenda item number 5, and the various policy option packages are described. And Kirsten and Jim went over those this morning. I feel like they do reflect the direction of the commission and focusing on implementation, but it'd be useful to have your eye on that as well. Jim, I don't know if you want to say anything in response as well.
Yeah, just really quickly, because I'm watching the clock. What I heard you say, Commissioner Sandoval, is, or maybe ask, was does or should the commission have more direct input into the POP process and legislative agenda? And historically, that work has started with staff, and then we bring the list to you. And I think we're probably scheduled, I don't know, are we scheduled to do that in May?
Yes.
Or July? It is May. So you will have your opportunity to weigh in, opine, thumbs up or thumbs down at the May meeting.
Chair MacArthur?
Yes, Deputy Director Green.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur and Commissioner Sandoval and Director Rule. I might be hearing something, Commissioner Sandoval, that you're not saying, but I would like to invite you to reach out to staff if you have any questions about the POPs. These are still really under development. So many of them really are a placeholder of issues that aren't yet complete. For example, on the climate friendly and equitable communities, we know that the budget is probably too low. The city of Bend alone has asked for $7 million and we have 2.5 million set aside. So the there's an additional supplemental attachment in that I believe you received them in a hard copy that Emma has put together. That's a one-page overview. It's still not that much information, but it'll give you a bit more information about our thinking. And our thinking is just not that deep. Like even if you were to say, okay, what's under the hood and behind this paragraph, there's not that much. So it is really early. So if you see intersections with CFAC or the Regional Housing Needs Analysis Policy Option Package, or would like to discuss those more in depth, we really truly do invite you to do that. And if I'm not out of order, I would suggest that you even do that before May. We are in the public process now, so there's no reason that, unless Director Wu would tell me I'm out of order, that the commissioners wouldn't participate with us right now in this process to help more fully develop those POPs. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. I think with that, I don't see any other official questions about the presentation. Again, Emma, you did a really nice job. I want to take a few moments, though, to acknowledge Palmer. We learned today, and a couple of us learned a while ago, that Palmer is leaving, and that's very sad news, but we wish him well because he'll do an excellent job wherever he goes. But it's important to celebrate really good talent. And so I was looking around my house, how do we celebrate you? And I thought of the balloons I gave to Jim, although, this one's already deflated, so that didn't sound very good. And then I thought maybe the way to celebrate you is to hold up some legislation that was successful, and I couldn't find anything that would work, and that seemed really boring. So instead, I found this book, which I think probably is similar to who you are and what you do. You're an adventurer. And I also found some seashells. And the story behind that is when Palmer first came to us, he had worked for quite a while at DEQ and was their legislative person, and then decided at some point he was bored with that or whatever, or wanted to do some new things. And so he took off, I think, a year and a half to scuba dive around the world. And I was so intrigued by your story because I love when people just decide they've got to do something and do something different, and you did, and then you came back really refreshed and did an amazing job for us. So I'm sad to see you go, and I just want to have other commissioners weigh in on your great work. And I admire many things about you, but in particular, I've noticed how you've been able to forge a real nice partnership and legislative front with Emma and with Sadie. I just see a lot of camaraderie come through on the screen among you three, and that's a really important thing because you're nurturing kind of the next group of folks that are coming up in this world. So I just wanted to thank you for your tremendous contribution to the department and the commission.
And I sorry to jump in. I have an excused absence from 2 to 3, so I have to leave. And I don't want to make it sound like Palmer's on and then I disappear. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your service. And I feel like you'll be in touch with us is what I feel like. So I look forward to seeing you again. And I'll be back later.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else want to say anything? I don't want to put you on the spot. This was
Chair MacArthur, I do. This is Nick. Palmer, you've just been exceptional to work with, both as serving on the commission as well as a community development director for a local government. Your coordination, collaboration, your insights, your responsiveness has just been exceptional, and we will miss you. I will miss you. And at the same time, wish you the very, very best. You'll be incredibly successful and continue to be incredibly successful throughout your career. So our loss is certainly others' gain, and I really wish you the best.
Ditto. Seeing no other hands, I might just ask Palmer if you have any wisdom to impart on us in your parting shots.
Well, Chair MacArthur, I need to start by first giving you all a very heartfelt and warm-felt thank you for those kind words and all those kudos. And I'll say that, yes, I had a role in the department's success, but I was only one member of a team. Emma and Sadie played large roles, as well as did many other people in the department. So in recognizing me I know you all think this way, but recognize the others as well as a part of that success. And yeah, I got to work on many incredible issues, from housing to climate change to wildfires to equity. I could talk and mention several others. And so it's been an honor to have served and served particularly with this group on the commission. You all are such a dynamic group, and you are so passionate about the work you do. So thank you for your service. And I really mean that. This is, as you know, a volunteer job that you put in many, many hours for. And I don't know if enough people in the public realize the level of service that you all provide. So I see it up front. And if I could peel back the curtain a little bit and let people know how much time and effort and passion you put into the work, I should take that opportunity, and I want to do that now. So thanks. Yeah, I feel like we'll all cross paths again. And so I think there's a really good chance of that. And I think you're in good hands with Emma and Sadie and whoever comes to replace me. So I see good things for the department ahead. And if I wanted to think about sharing a piece of advice, I'd be hard pressed to try to surpass a piece of advice I heard at a director's meeting, internal meeting we had the other day. And this is more tongue in cheek. So one of our staffers, actually the illustrious John Dunsmore, so our IT guru, when asked about, when overhearing one of our other colleagues talk about the difficulty of making children eat vegetables, said, you should put bacon on it. And then from there, it quickly turned in, if you want good advice, put bacon on anything and everything. It works wonders. So I'd be hard pressed to provide you better advice than that. But no, on a serious note, I think, the department should maybe double down on some of the things that you all have been doing more and more. And that's, and Director Rue gets a lot of credit for this. And that's multi-agency coordination, whether it's around Every Mile Counts, or some of the work that we've done around housing with OHCS. I foresee that being a real fruitful area of additional opportunity, is trying to partner with other agencies. I hope the good times last, but we have a way of seeing recessions from time to time. So when budgets tighten and revenue is scarce, I really think you're going to have to find a way to get work done through those partnerships with other agencies, and always partnering with locals governments as well. So I guess that would be my final comments. But thank you again for all your kind words. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Palmer. Best of luck. Great. Well, I think that completes this agenda item. We can move into agenda item number 9, which is our much appreciated update on Oregon's housing initiatives. And I think I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Ethan.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur. I'm sorry, this is Esther. Just for the record, we did not have anyone signed up for public comment.
Oh, thank you for keeping me on track. Appreciate it. Ethan, sorry about that.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Chair MacArthur, and members of the commission. My name is Ethan Stuckmeyer, Senior Housing Planner at DLCD, for the record. And today I will continue on this kind of, at this point, routine presentation on kind of keeping the commission up to date on all of the things that the DLCD housing team has been working on over the last several months, and especially since we last met in February. I understand that this is agenda item 9 in what has been a probably very, very exhausting and draining series of days for you all. So my hope that we have 90 minutes for this agenda item. Maybe we won't have to use all 90 minutes of that. But I want to just kind of give a brief overview of the desired outcomes here. So like I mentioned, this is really just kind of to keep the commission up to date on the work that we've been doing over on the DLCD housing team. That includes House Bill 2001, House Bill 2003, and some other things that I'll touch on. Commissioner Boyer, you had some questions on 2918, House Bill 2918. I'll touch on that in more detail in this presentation. And you'll see throughout part of this presentation, we'll talk a little bit about some policy considerations that we're working on some of these items. There's no expectation that the commission particularly give guidance or direction on some of those policy considerations, but I am open to that if you would like to share. All right, so 3 items here to talk about today. The first is just the general housing program update. The second piece is an update on the master plan communities rule updates. And then finally, we'll have a presentation from Sean Edging about the regional housing needs analysis work that is ongoing. Before I kind of jump into the general housing program update, I want to talk about some general housing team updates. You were introduced to Mari Valencia Aguilar this morning by Director Rue. She's on kind of week 2 here, so we will get her up to speed and presenting to you in no time. But also we've got some exciting week in front of us next week, where we'll be interviewing for kind of the 4th member of our housing team, the housing policy analyst. That position was formerly held by Sean Edging. So just some general updates there, some exciting times for us as a housing team. All right. So on middle housing, as I'm sure you're all well aware at this point, large cities population of 25,000 outside of the Portland Metro and cities of 1,000 within the Portland Metro are required to adopt middle housing codes that comply with the state Oregon administrative rules by June 30th of 2022, which is right around the corner and will be upon us in no time. So those amendments to comply with kind of House Bill 2001 and to be ready to go to review development applications for middle housing on July 1st. Those include kind of the processes and the definitions and the functionality for the siting and design standards for middle housing, but it also includes some work that was passed in the 2021 session, which is Senate Bill 458. And we did a preview or an overview of this piece of legislation, but this is what's kind of known now as the middle housing expedited land division process, where a property owner is entitled to subdividing a kind of parent lot into a number of smaller lots with 1 unit on each of those lots for middle housing applications. So they could sell those lots off in a fee simple manner and increase home ownership opportunities in middle housing. So all of those on July 1st are expected to be the new middle housing paradigm in the state of Oregon. And so in order to kind of meet that deadline, DLCD continues to hold these kind of open forums on the first Monday of every month, and also being part of technical advisory committees at the local level, participating in planning commission and city council work sessions, providing information and interpretations to local officials on this front. Or in terms of actually tracking a tracking spreadsheet as part of your supplemental materials last week. And I'm getting an internet connection unstable notice, so I may jump in from my phone here if I need to. But you received that tracking spreadsheet last week in your supplemental packet. As of March 24th, there are 36 large cities subject to House Bill 2001 rules. 27 of those jurisdictions have submitted post-acknowledgement plan amendment notices to the department. 6 of those 27 cities have already adopted codes, including Bend, Albany, and several others. 9 of those remaining 21 cities who have submitted PAPAs but have not adopted have had at least 1 public hearing. So we are in the thick of it in terms of cities going through their public hearing processes to come into compliance with House Bill 2001 by June 30th. A little bit of an update here in terms of new cities subject to House Bill 2001. You might remember at our February meeting, we added these cities who had surpassed the 10,000 population into the housing needs analysis schedule. These cities are also subject to the House Bill 2001 standards related to duplexes, allowing duplexes on every lot and parcel. And there are 7 cities that have surpassed that 10,000 population threshold, but really in practice, only 6 of those cities need to take action to comply with House Bill 2001 in this manner, because the city of Fairview was already subject to the large city middle housing rules because they are a city within the metro boundary. Those 6 cities now subject to House Bill 2001 duplex standards are North Bend, Astoria, Lincoln City, Molalla, Monmouth, and Independence. And I think it's important to note here that 3 of those 6, 50% of those 6 cities are located on the coast. So where previously there was only 2 cities subject to House Bill 2001 on the coast. So quite an increase there. In terms of, Commissioner Lilac.
Thank you, Ethan. This is great. I was just curious, as the cities on the coast propose their amendments, are there any issues that affect like tsunami inundation zones or any other coastal hazards that are limiting where they may be adding additional opportunities for housing? Just curious. Thank you.
It's a really good question, Commissioner Lilac. Yeah, part of the administrative rules in Division 46 allow jurisdictions to basically exempt those kind of natural hazard areas from the allowance of these middle housing types if they also prohibit the development of a single family detached home in those areas. So the intent of that is to provide protection for people and private property in those areas. But I see Sean is here with a hand raised. Jump in, Sean.
I'll go even a step further and say that the way the rule is constructed is if there is a demonstrable risk to life or property, you can preclude middle housing development there, period, regardless of what you do to single family detached dwellings. Just recognizing the intent wasn't to put people or property in harm's way. So.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a good reminder that if you do have questions, feel free to jump in. You don't have to wait for a specific point to ask those questions. A couple just kind of follow-up pieces on these 6 new cities. North Bend and Molalla have actually already adopted compliant codes to allow duplexes in the manner that's required under House Bill 2001. And Lincoln City and Independence have already submitted their post-acknowledgement plan amendment to the state. And Monmouth and Astoria, I know I've been working with both of those jurisdictions. They are well on their way to meeting the deadline, which is December 31st of 2022 for these newly 10,000 cities. All right. So moving into House Bill 2003, that arena, the Housing Production Strategy Program is I guess now officially underway. The first year of cities kind of going through this housing needs analysis, housing capacity analysis schedule, and then the follow-up housing production strategies began in 2022. So we adopted rules in 2020. There was kind of this 2-year delay between those rules being adopted and when we kind of see that work actually taking place. So there are 5 cities kind of on the schedule to adopt HNAs in 2022. Those cities are Grants Pass, Lebanon, Pendleton, Newport, and Oregon City. Oregon City is actually kind of shifted a little bit on this list because they got housing needs analysis in right before the end of 2021. So they've kind of shifted now on the schedule. But for the housing needs analysis section of those of this part of the Housing Production Strategy Program, most of these cities have received technical assistance from funds from the department to conduct that work and finish that work on time. There's at this point in time, no real concern that any of these cities will kind of miss that December 31st deadline. And of course, as part of being on the schedule for 2022, that means those cities will be submitting housing production strategies by at least the end of 2023, 1 year following. And we've been working internally with Dave Smith, our database administrator, to make sure that we're kind of prepared and ready to receive those housing production strategies and housing needs analysis, because there's a series of notifications and analysis that are required to take place once those are submitted to the agency. I wanted to touch a little bit on some of these other kind of, I would say, related but not directly related items to the housing production strategy work. You had a good discussion yesterday about the anti-displacement and gentrification toolkit as part of the climate friendly and equitable rulemaking that is underway. I wanted to touch just a little bit about kind of the, I guess, the genesis or the origin of that toolkit. So that toolkit includes three major elements of work. The first is a spatial analysis, which basically takes demographic data and a series of demographic points based on census tract level within cities, and basically runs that through an analysis to determine what type of neighborhood typology is, how can we describe those, the collection of those data points, and how can we describe neighborhoods in particular ways to assist us in thinking through some of these negative impacts that might result of housing production policies in our cities. And so you take that analysis of those demographic points, and basically through the toolkit, it kind of results in a description or a categorization of those neighborhoods into 6 neighborhood typologies. And then the intent of those neighborhood typologies is to link those housing production strategies in that menu of options that the Commission adopted in February. You might remember that's kind of the list of 80 or so housing production strategies, and really linking those housing production strategies to those neighborhood typologies. So an example might be one of these neighborhood typologies is an affordable and vulnerable type of neighborhood. And so that neighborhood in particular might be especially vulnerable to gentrification and displacement pressures. And the intent of linking those typologies to those housing production strategies is that a city could say, hey, we know that this typology, this neighborhood has this particular vulnerability, and we can apply our housing production strategies in a really fine-tuned and intentional manner to help mitigate some of those potential negative impacts of gentrification and displacement. So that's really some of the background there, and I hope that sheds some light on kind of how and why that toolkit is being invoked in the rulemaking process for CFEC. In addition to just that analysis and that toolkit, we at DLCD have been coordinating quite a bit with Oregon Housing Community Services staff on this front, and have actually included some of the anti-displacement and gentrification work and some of the climate-friendly concepts into their qualified allocation plan, which is basically the overarching criteria for how they review low-income housing tax credit projects, those competitive projects. So some of that work is already implemented in the 2022-2023 qualified allocation plan, but it will be kind of reinforced and iterated upon in future versions of the qualified allocation plan. And then also a really, really exciting part of this is OHCS has, through some of the climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking processes, has agreed to kind of do this pre-mapping of those neighborhood typologies for the entire state. So that really eliminates some of the work and I think resource constraints present at the local level about actually using that gentrification and displacement toolkit, and it kind of front loads that work at the state level, provides it in a much easier to digest format for local governments.
So Ethan, how much do you think, this is really super great stuff, and I appreciate your linking it back to the CFEC rules. So what is your sense of how familiar local jurisdictions are with this toolkit? And a lot of the concerns are raised, well, by home builders and others, but also local jurisdictions, that they just don't have the resources to do all this analysis stuff on housing and needs. And so it seems like this really goes a long way to help them do what they need to do under the draft rules on CFEC. So what is your sense of the disconnect there?
Yeah, I think that's it is a good point, because as part of the work that DLCD, the housing team, did to kind of commission that study, included a presentation to the potential implementers of that toolkit. And you might remember, as part of the rulemaking phase for House Bill 2001 and 3, we did not include the displacement and gentrification toolkit as a required element of that work. It is an optional piece of that housing production strategy program. However, I will say, as part of the Achieving Fair and Equitable Housing Outcomes portion of the housing production strategy work, cities are required to kind of consider potential displacement and gentrification impacts as part of that work. It's just not the venue through which they conduct that consideration is not through this methodology provided in the toolkit. So I think there is, to answer your question more directly, I think there is kind of a disconnect about, what are we supposed to be doing as part of the housing production strategy work, and what are we supposed to be doing as part of the climate friendly and equitable communities work, and how do those connect or maybe not connect? And so I think there is, to your point, a little bit of a disconnect there, certainly.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right. I touched a little bit early on about the housing portal, but I really do want to just kind of raise this up and highlight this as something that I think is really exciting in terms of how DLCD and cities interact in this housing production strategy program work. So the housing portal is really going to be, at least how we envision it, this kind of one-stop shop for how cities report on housing and how they interact with DLCD in terms of reviewing housing needs analyses and housing production strategies. That housing portal right now currently is populated by the building permit and various other kind of permitted and produced reporting elements. And then also it includes, or that was the venue through which cities and counties submitted information on the surplus lands database. So we're kind of building this as we go and including more and more kind of data collection so that we can do more data analysis kind of in the future. And one of the things that I think is really exciting about this housing portal as it relates directly to the housing production strategy program is that over time, we'll be able to use that portal as a way to kind of analyze the specific housing production strategies that cities choose and their effectiveness over time, because we can match up housing production strategies, the actual policies and tools that they're implementing, with building permit data and the increase in housing units over time. And we can do some fun analysis of that data to try to determine, which strategies are most effective, or how do those kind of strategies that are chosen break down by varying local jurisdiction types and city sizes and so on and so forth. So I'm really looking forward to that. Ask me again how that's working in 3 to 5 years and what analysis we're able to conduct as part of that. But I think the future is bright. All right. So this is the surplus lands database, House Bill 2918 that Emma and others touched on in the previous agenda item. And so just a real brief overview of this piece of work here, or this project. So like Emma mentioned, DLCD was basically directed to create a dashboard or application form or something of that in that manner to collect information from cities and counties on their surplus lands. And this is a new requirement as part of this bill that will take place on January 1st of every even numbered year. Cities and counties are required to report that information to the department. And also in every even numbered year, and I apologize, I mistyped the date here. This is actually, we submitted this report to the legislature on February 1st of 2022, not 2021. On that date, in every even numbered year, DLCD is required to submit basically a summary of all of the data that was submitted to the department to the legislature. So this was the first go round of that database. And Every city and county is required to submit that. You'll see some analysis here on the screen that 78 of the 241 cities and 15 of the 36 counties submitted data, which is about a 34% response rate. We received 537 data points, individual data points, and about 60 of those jurisdictions indicated that they have no surplus lands. And this database is intended to be kind of dynamic in a way where cities and counties can go into that housing portal, add, delete, edit the data based on the on-the-ground kind of realities of, you know, moving those surplus data or surplus lands to, you know, selling those off or adding new surplus lands or so on and so forth. So it is really kind of a living and breathing report or map. And so part of that requirement is that DLCD provide a public viewer of those. And so there is an online tool where folks can go on and kind of scroll around the state and see these various data points and some information about those data points. And for folks who are interested in reviewing the summary report that we submitted to the legislature and also viewing the map, that is attachment C in the staff report for this agenda item. Any questions on any of these general updates? I'm going to move into the master plan communities after this.
Sorry, I was on mute. Commissioner Boyer, you had raised the question about this, a question about the surplus lands database. Did you sort of cover the general explanation as to why we did that and kind of the future of it, or do you have a follow-up question?
Well, I'll sit with the documents more, spend a little more time with the attachments in our board, just in lieu of time today. So, and then I can ask questions offline at some point. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, you can certainly call out to Ethan. Great, thank you. Seeing no other hands up, take it away to the master plan communities part of this discussion.
Thanks, Chair. All right, so this is a part of the work that we're working on that commissioners might be a little bit familiar with as we brought this to the commission in either September or November of 2021. I can't quite remember the actual meeting, but some contextual background here. The master plan communities rule is a very specific section in Division 46 related to middle housing and how cities regulate middle housing. Basically, this part of the rule was included in Division 46 to answer this question, which is how does a city adequately plan and construct infrastructure for new large residential developments on unimproved lands within the urban growth boundary? So you might imagine a master plan community as a really large scale chunk of land previously undeveloped that has been brought into an urban growth boundary and is being planned for future development. And how do cities now that House Bill 2001 basically allows a property owner to build up to as many as 5 or more units on any particular lot? How does the city build the roads and the pipes and all of the infrastructure necessary to serve that with such a wide range of potential outcomes and potential numbers of units and people moving and operating within that area? And so the intention of that rule is to try to answer that question. What was eventually adopted by the commission in 2020 was that we would establish these kind of basic infrastructure planning expectations so that those areas provided at least a certain amount of infrastructure to accommodate an increased level of development without necessarily prescribing certain types of development in those master plan communities. So the way that we approached that was to ask cities outside of the Portland metro boundary to plan these master plan communities to accommodate at least 15 dwelling units per acre, and then cities within the Portland metro boundary to accommodate, plan to accommodate at least 20 dwelling units per acre. I'll go through really quickly the reasons why we feel like that is an imperfect solution to this process. And mostly it falls along the line of using density as a proxy for infrastructure capacity isn't necessarily a nuanced enough tool to actually answer some of those big questions about how cities finance infrastructure and how they plan for infrastructure in a development market that maybe doesn't have an appetite to build to those particular density levels. And then also there's some pretty major equitable, affordable, and fair housing outcomes that are kind of missed as part of applying those blanket kind of per density unit demand assumptions on middle housing units, which are typically smaller and typically use less, have less demand on the infrastructure system. And all of those are kind of the reasons why this rule as it exists currently is kind of impractical for local governments. So basically the result of that, kind of analysis and the conversation with the commission back in 2021 was to convene a working group to kind of analyze the merits of certain policy options to kind of remedy those issues that exist in the current rule. The first meeting of that work group took place on January 28th, and the second meeting is scheduled for April 13th. We took a bit of a break for the legislative session in February and March. And so we will meet in 2 weeks to continue our conversation on this front. So some of the overarching goals as established by DLCD and the commission was to find solutions that are both workable and realistic and meet the intent of House Bill 2001 spirit and intent without trending into or running counter to the rule requirements in House Bill 2001 and Division 46. So some of the policy considerations that came about at the first working group was that generally speaking, there was little to no interest to maintain the rules as currently adopted. That was kind of one of our policy options, policy option 0, which we kind of knew was not really feasible. You have to ask the question anyway. The working group didn't really have an appetite for maintaining that. And part of the reason for that was that option didn't feel like it balanced the burden that was placed on local governments with the spirit and intent of the House Bill 2001. So we kind of went back to the drawing board and kind of reconsidered those 3 other policy options and are choosing to kind of move forward with 2 primary policy proposals. And for the folks who are part of that working group, this might be a little bit of new information, kind of a teaser for the meeting packet that is going to be sent to that working group next week. So kind of 4 various policy options here kind of expressed in more detail. The first one was to potentially reduce that minimum density expectation for infrastructure planning that is currently set at 20 and 15 dwelling units per acre, potentially reducing that to some other dwelling or density metric. DLCD is choosing or is not proposing advancing this option because we feel like even reducing those kind of planning expectations, it doesn't really address the intended outcomes or achieve those intended outcomes, which is, you know, still using infrastructure planning as a proxy for infrastructure demand, which we feel like is still kind of the core of the issue. The second one, which we talked about with the working group, was establishing kind of a multiplier analysis for infrastructure demand for certain middle housing types. You could imagine this as kind of a base safe harbor approach, I guess, to how cities estimate the potential infrastructure demand for certain middle housing types. The reason why we're not proposing to advance this option is because it would require a lot of research in understanding what the actual infrastructure demand is for those middle housing types that doesn't really exist anywhere in the country, let alone in Oregon. And providing those kind of baseline numbers is not context sensitive. So you would be basically applying the same demand estimations for a quadplex in Ontario, Oregon that you would to Portland, Oregon. So the 2 kind of policy options that we are advancing are first, number 3 here, allow cities to establish a variable rate SDC structure for those middle housing types. This would be kind of a square footage or unit based variable rate SDC. And this would basically this would have the purpose of lowering those fees for smaller units with less infrastructure demand. And the fourth policy option here would be to require a certain mix of middle housing types in master plan communities. So this would give certainty to developers and to cities about how much infrastructure they should be planning for in those master plan communities, but it would require a little bit of analysis on our part to determine what that kind of correct mix and ratio would be. And so how we kind of envision this playing out is to kind of, I think of this as maybe forks in the road or options within options to kind of address how cities are choosing to regulate middle housing and master plan communities. So basically you start at this top part here where you're kind of cities are making this decision about how they would like to regulate middle housing in these new areas. And the first path available to them is to regulate middle housing just as they would in any other zone or area of their city, using those minimum compliance standards and those siting and design standards in the particular zone that master plan community might be zoned in. The second would be to, and this is allowed under OAR Division 46, would be to regulate those middle housing types in master plan communities differently than they would anywhere else in the city, which is an option invested to them in Division 46. So if a city were to kind of choose this left path, they have an additional fork in the road to choose, which would be maintaining that minimum planned density metric of 20 or 15 dwelling units per acre, or this kind of safe harbor approach of a variable rate SDC or required mix of middle housing in that master plan community. There's also kind of one additional option here, which would be to include both of these variable rate SDCs and requiring this mix as kind of three different, you would kind of add this third branch here to this tree, and a city could kind of choose either of these three options to regulate middle housing in those master plan communities. So I want to pause there because I know that was probably a lot and there's maybe questions about how that might function.
It's really creative approach. I have a quick question, and then I think Commissioner Liebach has his hand up. So I thought that the statutes already allowed variable SDCs. And I thought the city of Salem in particular used them, and perhaps some other communities, but maybe I'm out to lunch. Nick, you're shaking your head yes. So maybe you have a more detailed question on that front?
That was exactly my question. Yeah.
You are, yes, both of you are correct that is an option to cities in how they charge these system development charges to various types of residential development. We don't see a lot of cities taking that option, but this would be basically to reinforce or kind of double down on that potential option for cities in those particular areas to say, let's not treat these middle housing types as everything else or a single family detached home for the purposes of charging SDCs, because we know that those the infrastructure demand for those middle housing types is not necessarily the same. And so maybe there is an ability to kind of vary those charges to actually better get those more close to the actual infrastructure demand for those middle housing types.
Thank you.
I see Sean is up here. Anything to add? Okay.
Commissioner Warren.
Yeah, I have a quick question about the SDC world. I heard a rumor that the legislature was taking a serious look at how to influence SDCs to make housing more affordable. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I'm forgetting the bill number, and maybe Sean knows it. But yeah, the legislature has directed OHCS to conduct a study on how SDCs impact housing affordability. And I know that there was a deadline, I believe, of late 2021, but I think for OHCS to submit that report to the legislature, but I think they've asked for an extension on that. I actually don't know the new deadline for that analysis. Maybe
and a follow-up question, a little more related here. I'm assuming you've had some conversations with local jurisdictions about these various options. Do you have any read on if they prefer one or over the other between the variable rate SDCs or required mix of middle housing?
We actually haven't had an in-depth conversation with the working group members on these particular options because that meeting is taking place on the 13th of April. So we'll be sending these a memorandum with kind of explaining the pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages of all of these potential options to that group on the 6th, which is next Wednesday. I'll have more for you in the future.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sandoval.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So yeah, my main concern would be that master plan communities would exclude middle housing. So based on that, which of these options would ensure that cities wouldn't be able to do that?
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point, Commissioner Sandoval, because that was basically the catalyst for this particular section of Division 46, which was intended to say, because typically previously these master plan communities really there was one chance at providing the infrastructure to accommodate the development in that master plan community. And I think housing advocates were concerned that we should take this opportunity now when it is the cheapest to provide infrastructure to make sure that we can accommodate, redevelopment and turnover and providing those middle housing types now today when we are making those infrastructure investments. And so that's why we're seeing kind of an elevated level of basically planned infrastructure in those areas. And that's kind of why we went with 20 dwelling units per acre and 15 dwelling units per acre. But your point is exactly right, and is completely the intention of this particular set of rules. So for, just describing these kind of three potential options here, required mix of middle housing would definitely result in a mix of middle housing, just in the basis that it would be a standard for approval of a master plan community. I think variable rate SDCs is a good option to incentivize the development of middle housing for, say, a property owner or a developer who is looking to not overpay for infrastructure development as they're going through that approval process of their master plan community. So both options in this kind of box, all three of these would achieve that outcome, we think, in a really good way. But I see Sean has his hand raised.
Sean.
Yeah, no, and I'll just add on to that to mention that in none of these options is the ability to prohibit middle housing. Really, the kind of original way the master plan communities rule was structured, was allowing that kind of cap, and then that was rolled back and turned into more of a, you can anticipate this expectation for infrastructure, and if somebody exceeds that, you can require them to fill in that difference, right? And this is to say, well, let's give them a different option that gives them more flexibility, because that was pretty rigid, but also achieves good outcomes. So, what are those options? So in any one of these, middle housing is going to be allowed in these areas. The question is, what reasonable expectations can cities plan for when they are planning a greenfield development, pretty much a large greenfield development?
Makes sense. Follow-up questions from commissioners? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chair MacArthur. One last slide from me, and then I'll pass it over to Sean. So just in terms of next steps for this working group and this master plan communities work, like I mentioned, we've got that second meeting of that group on the 13th. We'll send out the packet next Wednesday on the 6th. We may, depending on how that meeting goes, we'll schedule additional meetings of that working group in May and potentially in June, with the hopes of coming back to the commission for a public hearing on a rule tweak to that portion of Division 46 at their July, at the July meeting of this body. That's kind of the plan, and we will move forward with that and be as agile as we need to be on that front.
I thank you. And I would be curious at a future meeting if you think it seems like it would be valuable for the commission to hear the results of OHSU's their analysis of SDCs. It's not the U at the end, it's only Oregon Housing. Community Services. Anyway, whatever the initials are, you know what I'm talking about. I think it's really a useful thing to do, and I'm glad they're doing it. I'd be curious to know about the results of that in it, and not just thinking about, you know, greenfield sites or master plan communities. And I know that wasn't what they were doing necessarily, but just kind of thinking about their potential application in climate-friendly areas.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good suggestion, Chair MacArthur. And I know that Sean's got a meeting with the folks at OHCS in 2 weeks' time to kind of debrief some aspects of that work.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think we're going to turn it over to Sean. Is that right?
Yes, we are.
Absolutely. Thanks, folks. And good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, my name is Sean Edging. I'm going to be providing kind of an update on the regional housing needs analysis. I know Emma said this before, but it feels like it's been an eternity since the short session. But you know, when you look at the calendar, it's only been a few weeks and a lot has transpired since then. So I'll do my best to try and cover a lot of the kind of updates that have happened since that short session. I also want to acknowledge, maybe before diving into this presentation a little bit, I just want to acknowledge how much work you guys have been doing over the past few weeks. So I want to try to keep this as light as I can, and just wanted to invite you, if you have any kind of clarifying questions or you want more detail on a specific thing, feel free. I'll try to be paying attention to like raised hands, and I'd be happy to take any questions in the middle of the presentation, and I'll try to pause for questions as well. But with that, let's move into just as a brief reminder of what we're doing in this biennium. This is work that's being driven by House Bill 5006 in response to requirements in House Bill 2003 for us and Oregon Housing and Community Services to submit reports to the legislature, essentially prototyping a methodology that estimates housing need for the state. This bill, House Bill 5006, provided us, some resources and direction to develop a set of legislative recommendations for the incorporation of a regional housing needs analysis into state and local planning programs. And additionally, as Emma kind of mentioned earlier, there was some follow-up direction in the short session under House Bill 5202 that directed us also to focus on issues of housing and land supply, which is a conversation that we anticipated, and this just provides that direct go ahead and some sideboards to guide that conversation. I'll talk more about the details of House Bill 5202 later in this presentation, but just so you guys are aware, those are the two bills that are kind of driving our work right now. If we could move to the next slide. So prior to the short session, one of our biggest priorities was taking that very broad legislative direction, to incorporate ARENA into state and local planning programs and try to operationalize it in a way that made it, achievable in the few months that we have to kind of answer a lot of questions. And so to do that, we prepared and kind of submitted a framework report that outlined a series of things that enables us to say, like, this is our goal, this is what we're shooting for. So this report is essentially what I'm going to be talking about over the next couple of slides. It dives into defining a problem statement, defining the outcomes that we want to see, right? Because we know this is about much more than just measuring housing need. Defining, what are some pathways to implementation to make good on that direction to incorporate ARENA into state and local planning programs. And then finally, recognizing that the issues that we're trying to address are so much broader than land use planning. What are the conditions of success that we need if our goal is to achieve better housing outcomes, right? And so I'll be kind of diving into each one of these in just a minute here. If we can move to the next slide. One of the first things that I kind of wanted to maybe preface this with is you might have seen a term floating around called the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. This is essentially a recommendation we're likely going to make to the legislature on a proposed name change. So the Regional Housing Needs Analysis term is something that was borrowed from California. It reflects a model that is much more regionally driven, where the state provides estimates of housing to regional councils of government, who then translate that into local allocations using a regional methodology. And for a lot of reasons, that's not actually really possible or even necessarily desirable in the state of Oregon. And one of the consequences of calling it this regional housing needs analysis is people have gotten really fixated on the regional aspect of it, and where are those lines drawn, and are those lines correct or not? And that's actually not even the major focus of like what this work is. So it's something that we will recommend for the purpose of this presentation and continuing on. It's been confusing to folks to try to introduce this term Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. So I'm just going to continue to call it the RHNA for now. I just wanted to preface this so that way you guys are aware, you might hear this term used interchangeably. That's just the context of it. If we could move to the next slide. So this is getting into the kind of problem statement and the outcomes that we want to work towards. In the last presentation or update I provided on the regional housing needs analysis, I kind of summarized what our initial process in the last biennium told us about the Oregon's planning system. We know that we're always, we're in a very significant underproduction or a deficit of housing, and our projections constantly reinforce that. We know that the people who are impacted by the housing crisis are people who've been historically underserved by government, including people with disabilities, communities of color, et cetera. And then we know that our system of housing needs projections reinforces that underproduction and that kind of perpetual shortage of housing, but it also reinforces patterns of racial and economic segregation, right? And so one of the important things that we needed to define in this report is, well, what are the actual outcomes that we're working towards, right? Because that will help us really define the types of policies that or define and evaluate policies that we propose as to whether they can get us closer or farther away from these outcomes. So recognizing again that this isn't really just about measuring housing need better, but actually achieving better outcomes. What are those outcomes? And we proposed three. The first one is to increase overall housing production, right? The second is to increase publicly funded and affordable housing production. And then the third is work towards more inclusive and integrated communities with a greater focus on housing equity, right? And fair housing more explicitly in our planning systems. And so this is a useful framework for thinking about, what types of policies are going to come out of this process. But if we can move to the next slide, the next step we had to do is think about that phrase to incorporate a RHNA into state or local planning programs, which functionally for us means, all right, the outcomes of this methodology, right? Obviously, we have to figure out how the methodology is done, right, over periods of time, but functionally that outcome, right, the estimates of housing need, how do we treat those in our Goal 10 system? And there's really kind of two major administrative pathways that we could implement an analysis like this. And I'm presenting these two, I want to be clear that I'm not presenting these two as a binary choice. Because between these two options, there's a whole, like an infinite variety of variations, combinations, nuances, and tweaks that can happen between these two pathways. And one thing we also highlight in the report is that each one of these pathways alone has kind of some shortcomings and considerations associated with them. So, right, just want to make clear that these are kind of two ends of a spectrum and not two choices that we have in front of us. But I'll just briefly describe each one of them if we can move to the next slide. I'm going to start with describing the housing production end of the spectrum of how we could implement an analysis like this in the state and local planning programs. So the easiest way to think about this is a focus on production in which the methodology, the regional housing needs analysis produces numbers that are targets that we're trying to shoot for. So this would require essentially tracking production over time and seeing, well, are we actually achieving production that we would need to see in order to actually meet housing needs over time, right? And so this would be evaluated essentially through the housing production strategy program. We'd be measuring housing production over time. We'd be also evaluating the types of strategies and measures that cities are implementing to create inclusive communities and build more housing. But there's also a lot of considerations in this option. One of the first ones is by just implementing these as production targets, one of the things that we miss out on is the ability to bring these into the other half of our Goal 10 system where we project housing need over 20 years, and then we plan zone capacity to accommodate that need, right? So we'd be missing out on that kind of additional zone capacity, right? And that could create some constraints down the line. The second piece that is kind of underlying this idea is if we start tracking production, one of the implicit questions that we have to grapple with is what happens when a target is not being met? What is the appropriate response that is fair, that is productive, right, and gets us actually closer to our goals rather than creating a bunch of difficult to meet requirements for local jurisdictions. And we actually have a lot of examples that we can look to in the state of California of things that are not fair nor productive, and in some ways maybe unfairly punish jurisdictions for circumstances outside of their control, right? So let's move to the other pathway. And again, I just want to emphasize, we don't have the answers here yet. It's just considerations that come up with each one of these pathways. On the other end of the spectrum is something that we might be a little bit more familiar with, which is the housing capacity analysis, or housing needs analysis is sometimes called. And this one, in this option, essentially the analysis, like the regional housing needs analysis, those estimates would serve as replacements for local housing needs projections. And when I say replacements, it would replace the components that are related to the number of households that a city has to plan for, as well as the affordability thresholds that they have to plan for. Things like housing mix and type, those would still be fundamentally localized decisions that are informed by these numbers, but are still decisions made at the local level. And so in this type of model, essentially they would receive a projection that requires them to plan and zone based on their share of population and economic growth, their share of underproduction, and then of course responding to the regional income distribution as opposed to the local income distribution. And one of the challenges with this approach, right, if we just focus on kind of zone capacity and projections, we miss out on the actual tracking of whether or not we're achieving results in the long term, right? And so we don't actually have a whole lot of focus on production and whether these units are actually built. And then of course, another thing that I think you guys are probably picking up on, maybe, I'm not sure, is that when you start tugging on that string of the housing needs projection, you start implicating all of the other components of how we plan for land under a housing capacity analysis, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I guess before I kind of move on, I want to pause maybe a minute. Just, you know, I know this is kind of some new information for you all. I wanted to see if you have any questions on each of these kind of ends of the spectrum.
It is a lot, but you're doing a really nice job of explaining it. So, commissioners, any questions for Sean? I don't see any. Why don't you go ahead? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Warren.
I'm pulling a vice chair move and having last minute thoughts. So I think this is great, Sean. I think it's probably much past needed. My question is, you know, with this new kind of direction of using the RHNA instead of the housing capacity analysis, or HPS, do you estimate that the housing needs will grow, or the actual capacity analysis will increase for jurisdictions? Does that make sense? So like the number of homes they need to build will increase by using the RHNA over their more localized housing production strategies?
You're ahead of me. I'll talk about that in the next slide.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Lilac.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it, and I'm still processing a lot of what you're presenting now, and I'll probably have more questions as we go on. But just that middle point, jurisdictions would be required to plan and zone based on share of, and then you have the underproduction. Well, to recognize that there is an underproduction, I think will be actually really welcome news. So it says, you know, they're going to be required, but I think a lot of our jurisdictions in Central Oregon will welcome that. I've often heard from Brooks Resources, a big builder developer in Central Oregon. One of their criticisms of the UGB is that when we create the population estimate, we then begin the UGB evaluation process, and that process often is not completed for 2 to 3 years. Well, by the time it's adopted, we're automatically behind 2 to 3 years. And so to begin to think about planning and zoning for the share of underproduction, I think is a great step forward to begin to recognize how can we reverse the underproduction, planning for underproduction right out of the gate.
And I'll also mention too that that's one, a great comment, but then two, also touches on the administrative components of UGB expansions, which we'll talk about when we start talking about House Bill 5202. It's great. I think you guys are picking up on a lot of the same things that we were when we, you know, kind of initially developed this report. Any other questions before we move on?
I don't see anybody else's hand up. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so let's move to the next slide. So to Commissioner Warren's point, this is true for both of the options, but particularly in the pathway for incorporating this into housing needs projections, right? The estimates that are provided in this analysis are far greater than what local housing needs projections are producing today. They incorporate not just underproduction, right? Housing units that should be on the ground today but aren't. They incorporate housing for people experiencing homelessness, as well as accounting for the fact that you actually need more than one housing unit for every household that's created, right? So these numbers are much bigger than what they've traditionally been, right? And we have kind of a system of zone capacity, right, that can be very contentious, and this would just kind of add a little bit of accelerant to that process that already exists, right? So in some ways, just adding this component without addressing these other elements of the housing capacity analysis is something that would create a lot of challenges for jurisdictions and create challenges in implementation. And part of the reason for the legislative direction is specifically to address that dynamic. And I'll talk about that again in a minute. But again, for considerations in both of these pathways, the metro region also has its own approach to urban growth boundary expansions that intersect with both of these types of options, right? So that would need to be reconciled in some way. And that is not giving it justice. It's a very complicated topic, right? And then finally, we also have to consider the fact that the entire kind of Goal 10, regular planning framework really only extends to cities above 10,000 population. And that's a good thing, right? The cities below that population threshold are very resource constrained, but we also have to think through, well, how do we, support them in their ability to do this, right? When this framework doesn't really apply to them. And then one thing that we really wanted to highlight in this report is that other major systemic changes are going to be needed to achieve the outcomes that we want to see. And many of these aren't even necessarily part of the land use planning program. And I want to talk about that really quickly before we come back to the land supply piece. So if we can move to the next slide. And so you can imagine, right, if our goal here is to achieve, more housing production, more affordable housing production in more inclusive communities, inclusive and equitable communities, the analysis alone and just associated reforms to land use planning, they're an important component of helping us get towards those outcomes, but they're not going to achieve it by themselves, right? There's all of these underlying other areas of work that need to happen and need to be in place to ensure a program like this would be effective. Some of the ones that we've highlighted immediately include, right, accountability. One of the underlying components of this is that we don't really have a statewide accountability framework for housing development. And that includes not just local governments, but state government too. The amount and type of state level funding, obviously this is going to take a lot of investment to produce, especially publicly supported housing. And we need to be making essentially very strategic investments in things like that support publicly supported housing, including things like infrastructure. And then finally, administrative capacity. Obviously, this is going to take a significant amount of work from local governments to implement, but it's also going to take a very significant amount of work from other state agencies who haven't traditionally been involved in housing planning in order to make this successful. Things like even licensing requirements have huge impacts on the ability to produce housing at scale, right? So there's all of these areas that really impact the outcomes that we need to see, that we need to be building capacity for, right? And so this is just to highlight, there has to be follow-up work to this. It can't just be implement this analysis and everything's going to be hunky-dory. It's got to be more comprehensive than that. And that's hard, right? So I just wanted to emphasize that, but a lot of the discussion during kind of the legislative short session really did come back to this idea of land supply. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit if we can move to the next slide. Right, so this is one of the pieces that I think you folks started noticing in this is, right, when we kind of layer on this analysis and with these much higher estimates that we've had in the past, it really starts kind of implicating a lot of these questions of, well, how do we approach housing planning through Goal 10 and then, specifically urban growth boundary expansions when a need is identified, right? So the legislative direction that we received is, well, actually, we expect you folks, at DLCD to address these issues more directly. And here are the parameters. Here's specifically the items that we want you to focus on in these conversations. I'll talk more about the components of this. We're essentially recruiting for a work group, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the four major topics that they wanted us to focus on include: one, how urban growth boundaries can be better utilized to increase housing types and units. And this includes the reduction of, restrictive and outdated land use policies, as well as conversion of kind of underutilized commercial or employment uses to residential. Really kind of getting at how are we using land in an efficient way inside of our urban growth boundaries and maximizing that potential. The second and third piece kind of relate to some of the pieces that you were talking about, which is when a need is identified for a UGB adjustment, first off, how do we make that need more administratively streamlined so that way it's not this extremely heavy analytical and very litigious piece of work in order to justify a UGB expansion, but also the regulatory review components. How do we address some of those administrative factors that make UGB expansions take a very long amount of time, right? And then finally, when we, I guess kind of permeating all of this is how do we fund, and I mean, I would go even beyond that to say, how do we support in general the ability for cities, small cities, and cities below 10,000 to actually participate in this program, even though they're not required to, right? So kind of permeating the entirety of this is how do we make this process more streamlined, more aligned with the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and of course, still, embody the spirit of the statewide land use planning program. So I guess I'm going to be talking a little bit about the work group and the fact that we're essentially in a recruitment process for that. But before I get into maybe those logistical details, I guess I want to pause here for just some feedback from you all or questions.
Yeah, I really appreciate the pause. So I thought that Richard Whitman did an extensive multi-year effort, and it was kind of right as he was leaving, and then Director Wu took over, excuse me, on streamlining the urban growth boundary process. So if this, wasn't it enough? Doesn't that process that came out of that work? What's behind bullets number really 2 and 3? I guess 3 in particular, but it affects 2 as well.
I would invite somebody who has maybe a bit more historical knowledge to speak to that, because I actually don't know. This is my first time.
Yeah, Gordon, are you there? There you are.
Yes, I am. In answer to that, in 2013, the legislature adopted those changed UGB rules. Then we spent 2 years writing rules to implement the statutory changes, I should say. Those changes resulted in the streamlined UGB method, which began in January 2016 as an alternative to the regular method. To date, not a single city has submitted a streamlined UGB application, so that the streamlined UGB provisions have not been used by any city. And we've had some work done by the city of Newburgh, which looked most closely at it, and they determined that it was not for them. They determined some methodological flaws with it as well. And we haven't had the ability at this point to expend the rulemaking effort to go back and look at those flaws and try to fix them, because it wouldn't be a simple matter. I think there'd be some controversy involved in doing that. So that's where we are at this point. And meanwhile, the statutes were also changed to make the locational analysis under the existing method quite a bit more streamlined than it was in the old days, which led to the notorious 2011 McMinnville decision, which was the whole reason this whole streamlining effort started. And I think that process is, as we pointed out, well over 30 UGBs have been amended under those new rules. And so that's where we are on this. And I think there's some question about, how broken our UGB process really is. I would argue it's not very broken, but others disagree. But we will, we would be looking at this again to see if there are any additional changes we can make to make it simpler, more easy to deal with, get rid of some procedural roadblocks, perhaps, without eliminating the core essence of the UGB expansion or change process.
Great, that's really helpful, Gordon. Thank you. Commissioner Warren.
Yeah, so Sean, I have a question about, so when we do the OHNA, try to use the correct terminology. How does that get distributed to different cities?
Yeah, so let's start with, I guess, the component of what an OHNA would replace if it was to replace housing needs projections. So when a city does a housing needs projection, they start with a population forecast that's provided by Portland State University. And they, essentially translate that based on kind of local conditions into the amount of housing units that they would expect to see over the next 20 years. And it's really informed by what's already being built here today, what are our kind of local income distributions, right? What's our average household size, things like that. And what this would functionally do is take out the components that are related to how many households you expect to accommodate and what income bins they fall into. One of the questions that leaves is, how do you actually translate that into an expected number of housing mix and units that you would expect to see over time? Now, the way that gets estimated and allocated down to cities in the prototype methodology, right? And this is something that we would need to establish a process for establishing periodically, is the estimate happens, right, at a kind of larger geography. We use these things called PUMAs. These are public use microdata areas. This is published by the US Census Bureau that has a lot of information related to kind of intersections of housing and, race and disability, right? All these different categories. And once we have those estimates of here's what we expect the need to be, they are then allocated down to cities and counties based on a mixture of two factors, one being their population forecast, and the second being their regional job share. And that's pretty uniform in the methodology. And there's kind of questions as to how should that work? What is the process by which we should, reach that decision, right? But functionally, that's how it works in the prototype methodology. Then from there on, right, the questions of what we're trying to address in this land supply work group are related to, all right, now we need to translate it to, housing mix and types. We need to start going through the process of inventorying buildable lands and then determining whether we have sufficient buildable lands or if we need to do, efficiency measures or leading up to urban growth boundary expansion. And functionally, I could say that this process really seems to be related to providing greater clarity and certainty around each of those components.
That's awesome. That was a great explanation. Thank you. And that leads me to kind of my major question here is, one thing we do know about climate is that the spatial distribution of where people live and where they work is a massive component to how much they drive. So is there any consideration to that kind of spatial analysis brought into this, redistribution of where the homes should go?
Yeah, so I'll mention that part of the analysis is driven by regional job share to reflect that idea of people should be closer to where they work. I should mention, though, that it gets really difficult to, such a broad analysis like this, to try to develop prescriptive methods that say no housing should go specifically here. It's one of the things that needs to be brought into the Goal 10 process more generally. But one of the hard parts, and I'm sure you guys are grappling with this in CFAC, is, well, okay, how? What's the appropriate kind of lever or requirement that would actually achieve that, right? And just acknowledging that that's a continuing issue. We don't exactly have an answer for it, but it is part of our thinking.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Lilac.
Thank you. I'm just curious the timeline of when the work group will begin. And I can certainly confirm that there will be interested parties from Central Oregon to participate. And I'm sure as Director Root knows and hopes this will become a Central Oregon work group, because we have a lot of interested parties, but parties that have been very, very successful at collaborating and working together, such as the 2016 Bend Urban Growth Boundary Amendment process that won a statewide award with Central Oregon Land Watch, Brooks Resources, and the city and others that really started to identify some of these key issues. So very, very exciting. I'm just curious about when the work group might begin.
Yeah, and that's actually on the next slide if you wanted to talk about it, but I recognize that Ethan has his hand up too.
Thanks, Sean. Chair MacArthur, I just wanted to respond a little bit to Commissioner Warren's previous question about kind of how this work would intersect with the CFAC work and CFAs and so on and so forth. I think as we're working through the RHNA work, we're really trying to, and Sean mentioned this a little bit earlier about the RHNA really replaces that kind of housing needs projection estimate, right? But what cities do to accommodate that work or that those targets or whatever however it kind of plays out in the end is really still up to the local governments. And so those kind of decisions about the where of housing would be informed by things like the CFEC process and their other housing production strategies and so on and so forth. So it is kind of all funneling down to the local government to make those kind of local context decisions.
Great.
Yeah. Should we move on to the next slide?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the things, I'll start with the housing land supply work group, because we've recognized, like, even before the bill was passed, like, yeah, we need to do this right now because we don't have enough time to actually do this. So we started recruitment pretty much as soon as we could, as soon as we were in the know that this was going to be coming our way. And one thing I wanted to emphasize, we are doing kind of an open recruitment. We've sent this out through, kind of a variety of channels to invite folks to apply and to essentially complete a short application describing their interest and perspective they bring to the table. That is something that we actually have distributed right now and is going to be due back to us on April 8th. That's Friday of next week. What it sounds like, I wonder if this might be appropriate. We do have the invitation materials that we're happy to send through anybody. I'm wondering if we should distribute that among LCDC folks, if they would like to, forward that to folks that they have in mind. And we're really planning to have kind of our first meeting on May 5th. One of the things that we have to grapple with in this process is that there's very limited time to talk through a lot of things, right? So we had to put a lot of thought into thinking through how are we going to structure the meetings, what issues are we going to talk about when, and how is that kind of review and refinement process going to work. So yeah, no, definitely moving on a fast timeline, right, to be ready for the 2023 session. I'll also mention that the RHNA work group is going to be reconvening in April 21st, and there are going to be kind of two parallel pathways. We've also distributed the application to apply to work group members here if they wanted to talk through land supply issues more specifically. And we'll be, kind of continuing meetings with them leading into the 2023 session. And we're also kind of underway with our engagement process. We've been scheduling out a series of focus groups with a variety of folks, including, local government planners, market rate and affordable housing developers, community-based organizations, continuums of care, et cetera, et cetera. And we've been holding those focus groups and we'll continue for the month of April. Then we plan on following that up with a kind of series of regional forums that I'm working with regional reps to plan through in the months of May and June. So there's a lot of conversations on the horizon. They're very challenging and they kind of dive into a lot of the hard and sticky questions of kind of goal 10 planning in general. So there'll definitely be more updates to come in the next few months. I guess I'll pause here for a little bit and see if there's any kind of process questions. We can absolutely forward any the invitation and application materials to anybody who's interested.
Yeah, it sounds like Commissioner Lilac is and perhaps others. So why don't you just send it to all of us? This is a hornet's nest, as you probably know, that you're getting into land supply. I know it's called housing supply, so it sounds a little bit safer, but it's really not. So why is it called housing land supply as opposed to housing capacity work group? Because as we know, if we build up, we can create more capacity for housing without having to expand UGBs. Not always, we have to keep our eye on the bigger horizon, but I'm just really kind of alarmed by the title, and maybe we were required to have that title. So help me understand where we're going with this.
I'll invite the director's office to speak to that. We actually thought about that question a lot in trying to think, like, what is the appropriate name for this work group and how do we distinguish that from the work that we're already doing? So if Kirsten, are you on the call right now?
Sure. Yeah. And I just, I think, Chair MacArthur, thank you. I think that's great. I frankly like yours better. Chair MacArthur also named climate friendly and equitable community. She's a good namer. But I take your point. Palmer and Emma were quite close with the naming and the development of the concept in the legislature. So I'd love us to take that under advisement. A little bit of the blurb is out there now. We've done a call for, we're doing a recruitment with the old name. But I think that it'd be easy to explain why it was the commission's direction that we use this other name. because I think it gets to the notion of redevelopment, which we're working so hard on and want to engage with Business Oregon and other partners in terms of water and sewer and service. So I think it's a better name, honestly. Sean, I can't remember if we had a better reason than that, but I'm not good at naming or any other thing that comes close to PR or marketing. Chair MacArthur knows that, so I'm happy to advance it in this way, unless others disagree. Thanks.
I'll also add, it's good that we're having this conversation now, because as we've learned, it's difficult to change a name as the process moves on. So.
Yeah, and even if we call it housing capacity and work group, I would hope that the group is pretty balanced on people that are sort of pro. I mean, because even though we'll name it that, they'll think it's housing land supply. So you're going to want to have the folks around the table, if in fact you're really trying to get all perspectives that are pretty balanced. The sort of the pros and the cons of UGB stuff.
Yeah, I will mention the bill does specifically call out discussing issues of regional housing needs and land supply, but I think we can still make that determination. And as long as we do it early, it should be fine.
Is there any objection from other commissioners to at least introducing that idea of housing capacity?
No objection from me.
Thank you. Seeing no other person raise their hand. Thanks, Sean. Any other questions for Sean at this point? I think you still have a few more slides. Is that right?
Actually don't. This is the end. So yeah, if we move to the next slide, questions and discussion. Thank you guys so much. I know this is, a lot to hear on a Friday afternoon after, just really heavy stuff. I really appreciate you guys being here to listen.
Well, we appreciate you. And I'm once again blown away by all the work from our amazing housing team, and welcome to Mari to that team. It's just, and for those of you that don't know, the middle housing piece relative to master plan communities wasn't really a funded piece because it came up through our other rulemaking. So I think that housing staff thought it was an important enough issue that they squished it in there, but it's not as if they had extra time and resource to do that, but they're doing it anyway. So thanks for, everything you're doing. It's really super stuff. And you present so well. It's wonderful to have your face talking to legislative committees and others to really understand this and explain it. Questions from commissioners on any part of the housing portfolio? Commissioner Warren, did you have no? Okay. I guess I saw your hand go like that. I wasn't sure if it was the fake hand or the real one. I'm getting a little rummy. I apologize. Commissioner Sandoval.
Thank you, Chair. And Sean, thank you for the great presentation. You always present very clearly, really complex material, and you just really nicely presented. So thank you for that. So currently, the housing agency doesn't really allocate affordable housing kind of using locations or using cities, right? And so I'm assuming that that could be done now. Well, once we have the housing needs analysis, so that the housing agency could actually say, oh, okay, there's a big need for affordable housing in, I don't know, in Talon or something. Then we're gonna try to allocate our resources to that area. Right now we allocate them by whichever developers are able to meet our qualified allocation plan. And then they compete amongst each other and so forth. So yeah, go ahead.
I'll just reinforce that by saying, one of the efforts that's happening right now is at least trying to define better, these principles, right, of inclusion and integrated communities comes with, well, for starters, we have to measure it, and that is difficult, right? But there's options that exist to help us do that. One of the really perplexing and challenging things, and we've talked to some housing scholars around the country who've kind of focused in on these issues of how to approach state level housing planning reform, of this idea of, location is such an important part of it, especially this idea of we need to have better access and better opportunities of housing in areas that have been especially historically exclusive. But one of the challenges that we face with that is there's this kind of unresolved tension that exists between, well, okay, do we build more housing in areas of opportunity, or do we invest in the communities that exist that that house people? Do we invest more in communities, right? And one of the hard things that we're going to face in this process is we're probably not going to resolve that tension. But one of the main things that we need to do is we need to at least start measuring it and seeing, all right, how are these patterns of exclusion playing out in the Oregon context? So I just want to acknowledge that is absolutely a perplexing thing.
Ethan.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the other kind of, and it is a little surprising that we haven't had this before, is just a full understanding of what the housing need is across the state of Oregon. And I think this regional housing needs analysis is a step in the direction of understanding the full housing need across the state, not just within UGBs, and even those numbers not being necessarily correct and correctly portraying the need. So I think this is an incredible step in the direction of being able to fully understand the data and understand where the housing need is and how we can allocate resources to those particular areas.
And I'll also mention, we now have a Fair Housing Pro on the team. So that's very exciting.
Great. Other questions? So I have a question. I was thinking about what Palmer said about bacon and also about the fact that there are all sorts of eyes. Our land use program is involved and can be controversial, but there's all sorts of eyes focused, multiple eyes, legislative, local jurisdictions, us, others, focus on affordable housing, middle housing. Can middle housing be our bacon in the way of communicating to legislators, which you already are doing, but communicating that this is a holistic program, part of which is really designed, especially as we're moving forward with CFAC and House Bill 2001, it's really designed to produce more housing in the way that they want, the legislature wants and others. Can we use this as our bacon? Because people really want this to happen. And is that the way to tell the land use story to some audiences that can communicate the value of the program in something that they really value?
I'll just mention one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is the need. We need to, and we've tried to emphasize this as much as we can. We really want to build in place systems that reward people for doing the right thing, right? And there's a lot of places where that can exist. Places include like infrastructure finance and planning, right? The types of kind of bacon. Maybe I prefer cheese on it, but rather than bacon. But
yeah, I'm not a bacon fan either, but I was using technology.
But the idea of essentially kind of embedding those incentives for folks who are really doing good work. And one thing I've been wanting to acknowledge with a lot of the work that we've been doing lately with middle housing and climate friendly and equitable communities is just acknowledging just the sheer amount of work that a lot of local governments are doing already, right? And putting in a lot of resources to that. And to the extent that we can acknowledge that and recognize that, I think would be very helpful for putting the cheese on the broccoli, so to speak, or bacon, whatever your metaphor is.
Ethan.
I won't continue the analogy, but I think the important part of all of this work is just a regrounding in the Goal 10 framework of how we accomplish that, the really all-encompassing and comprehensive goal or the text in Goal 10, providing housing options for all Oregonians and so on and so forth. I think all of these elements are steps in that right direction: middle housing, housing production strategies, understanding our housing need. And I think everybody can really kind of agree, no matter about if you disagree about the how, but I think achieving those goals is the important part, and everybody is on board with that general premise. As long as we can give options and clear guidance on how we can achieve those lofty goals of Goal 10, that's how we can find success.
Yeah, and I totally appreciate that and agree with it. But the bigger story, getting back to the bacon and everything else, the bigger story is that we could have the best SDCs, we could have the best RNAs and strategies, and we could have the best, kind of zoning and comp plan stuff. But if we blow out the UGBs and we don't think about transportation in connection with that, first of all, we're not going to get development in the areas where we want it, which is near where transit and walking and biking is. And it's not going to be affordable living. So there's a bigger story. You could take all this stuff away and do all this wonderful stuff, and we would not achieve our goal, our collective goal of affordable living for Oregonians.
Yeah, and for what it's worth too, I think, as I'm starting to approach the housing and land supply issues, I think one of the major ways that I'm trying to think about approaching this is recognizing that so many of our kind of past attempts to simplify the process have really kind of layered on a lot of additional analysis, when I think, we at the state maintain a lot of ability to do quite a bit of analysis that can kind of front load and provide a series of choices and options for local jurisdictions, and of course provide them the opportunity to do analyses themselves. But just essentially increasing kind of that clarity and saying, well, we're trying to get to these outcomes. Why don't we specify these outcomes more deliberately, right? When we're thinking through what those responsibilities are, and trying to just embed that in a way that gives jurisdictions very clear choices, and they don't have to worry so much about kind of the, we have to do this analysis XYZ way, otherwise we'll get sued, right? So I think in thinking about it, I'm not thinking about it as so much of like a, UGB versus not UGB, but rather how do we make this process more clear and get better outcomes, right? Because I think we have a lot of ability to do that.
Yeah, no, I appreciated one of your early slides, Sean, that really described the outcomes. I think the more that we do that as an agency, figure out what we want to have happen on the ground, then work up and process architecture, our racks and everything else, and our engagement strategy and our messages and our products to reach those goals, the more we are, the better off we are. So, but even though you are focused on the right goals, as you listed there, a lot of folks out there will just be about land supply, just FYI, you know this, but just, I've been through many of those battles. So just, you can describe it any way you want and pull them back, and you are talented at that. But ultimately, there's just going to be folks in the mix wanting to expand things just because, right? Just because they can or would like to be able to. So anyway, that sounds a little cynical for the end of the day, but I'm just kind of low energy, apologies. But there's a reality element there to all this exciting work you're doing. Anyway, any other questions from commissioners? We do have one person signed up for public comment, and that is Peggy Lynch. So perhaps we can plug her in. And Peggy, I'm hoping you can keep your comments to 3 minutes, because we'd like to hear from you.
There is a slight delay, but I believe Ms. Lynch has joined us.
I think I'm doing my best, and I can see that I am here now. Thank you very much. You have had a very long couple of days, an incredible amount of work, and I really want to say how much I appreciate all of you doing all the consideration. As I was listening today, particularly about this last item, I wanted to use my gray hair and remind everybody about periodic review. Remember that? When we first started this program, we were supposed to have the opportunity for local jurisdictions to do a review every 5 or 7 or 10 years. What has happened with 2003 and the new housing needs analysis every 8 years has actually reinstituted that. And I think that as we begin to use that, the concern that everybody has that the UGB process takes forever and that it's outdated, we may see it as less so, because we're actually seeing every 8 years the changes and the needs in the various, particularly large cities. And so I think that as we move forward with this new process, we may find less problems that way. And I just wanted to say thank you all very much for all the work that you are doing on behalf of Oregon. And I'm looking forward to continue to work, and I'm looking forward to the May meeting. I'm driving to Salem. And thank you all.
Thank you, Peggy. We really appreciate all the years you put into, all the energy you put over the years into these really important topics. And so thanks for being here today. Any questions for Ms. Lynch?
No, just we love Peggy Lynch.
Yes. Okay, I think unless the housing team wants to say anything else, I think we are done with this agenda item, and that means we're done with the day. I don't think we have any things that kind of poke their ugly heads for items number 10 and 11. So I think we're adjourned, except I do want to remind commissioners, can you fill out your scorecards? They were sent, that form was sent by Esther in one of her many packages that she sends this week. And it is really important. So gosh, just thanks to all your efforts, staff and director and deputy director and fellow commissioners. Wow, it's been a really intense couple of days, it feels like, but I'm honored to be a part of this. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Chair.